Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei was Gabriel's Joker. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. In the meadows of Japan, a brown-haired youth of about 17 fled across the grass, his clothing torn and his chest heaving from exertion. He ran from a man who pursued him with lethal intent, and he shouted for the monster to leave him alone. The boy stumbled and bruised his lip, then looked up in terror to see his pursuer standing before him with an arrogant, sinister expression. The man announced that he had been sent to eliminate the boy because he was a threat to supernatural beings and intended to kill him. The boy closed his eyes, expecting his end. After a few moments he opened them in confusion to see the pursuer suddenly struck by a blue spear and collapse. The frightened youth searched for his savior and saw the silhouette of a woman with white, sky-like wings watching him with a warm, relieved smile. He approached cautiously, sensing she meant no harm. Issei, bewildered, asked if she had saved him. The woman, who identified herself as Gabriel, explained that she had been watching him since his birth and invited him to come with her. She took his hand and formed a circle with a cross in the center. A bright flash forced him to shield his eyes with his arms. When he opened them, he found himself in a new place and fell silent at the sight. Gabriel introduced herself as a seraphim of heaven and one of its leaders. She told him that the three great factions existed: the demons, the fallen angels, and that the man who had attacked him was a fallen angel. She explained that the factions had been at odds since ancient times and that they had targeted him because of a strange power they perceived within him. Issei, saddened and confused, asked what he was and what she meant by saying his mother was an angel. Gabriel told him he was an angel, though she could not yet explain the nature of the power within him. She said she had observed him with interest since his birth and reassured him that his mother had wanted him to live as a human. She then asked him to look at his own back. He saw 4 pairs of shining white wings on his back and then looked at Gabriel, who revealed 12 pairs of wings, confirming for him the existence of the factions she had described. Gabriel smiled brightly as she confirmed his name was Issei, and she asked him if he would be her Joker. Issei asked whether that role would require loyalty, and when Gabriel affirmed it, he accepted with a smile. Gabriel returned his smile. Over the following days, Gabriel taught Issei about the angels and the other factions. She introduced him to the other seraphim, and their meeting brought both surprise and joy among them, leaving some of the others puzzled in the face of new revelations. 2 years later, Issei had trained diligently under Gabriel's guidance. He served happily and had developed a quiet belief in something greater. Through training he had begun to unlock his angelic powers and had become well informed about events around him and about the human world during his absence. One afternoon he lay in the house Gabriel had given him in heaven, lost in thought about his parents. A familiar presence entered, and a brown-haired woman settled against his chest and curled up beside him. Issei asked why Irina had come. Irina, his childhood friend who had become an exorcist, pouted and insisted that she had only come to sleep by his side. Issei recalled how surprised she had been to learn he was an angel, and how she had behaved as if the revelation delighted her. Issei rose to go see Gabriel, knowing she disliked it when Irina was overly clingy, and noticed that Irina seemed distracted. He called her name to draw her out of her reverie. Irina became serious and told him that she wanted him to return to the human world, to Kuo City. At first he thought she was joking, but seeing her earnest expression he agreed, aware that Kuo was where he had lived with his parents. Issei teased Irina about her forgetfulness regarding mission details, which made her blush and feign annoyance. Gabriel observed the exchange and noted that Irina had been looking at Issei more strangely than usual lately, wondering aloud whether Irina might be developing feelings for him. Irina looked amused because she enjoyed teasing him. Issei smiled silently at what Irina had said, though it was true that Gabriel had grown unusually affectionate toward him over the past 2 years. The thought that Gabriel might have feelings for him distracted him for a moment, but he was certain she would never notice someone like him. Despite the time they had spent together, Issei and Gabriel treated each other mostly as friends, yet they never neglected the respect they owed Gabriel. After all, Issei was Gabriel's joker and he would never forget that she had saved his life. Issei asked Irina if she was happy to return to Kuo, noticing that she seemed lively. Irina replied that she was excited to return to their city and that she also wanted to know how his parents were doing. Issei simply watched her as he packed, reflecting on the life he had 2 years ago and the one he had now. He felt glad that Irina was safe and relieved to see her well, but he also had a mission to carry out. He and Irina prepared to leave the celestial realm and return to the human world, bidding farewell to the others. Issei asked if it was time to go home and whether Irina would accompany him, since she had no duties related to the mission. Irina answered that she did not plan to leave him and that Gabriel had permitted her to join the mission, so they would go together. She smiled, and Issei noticed how nice she looked when she smiled. He nodded and then focused a bit of sacred energy to manifest his wings. During training he had learned to control them, though he was still not entirely comfortable. Gabriel had told him that his wings were unique, something she had never seen before. Irina had reacted with the same surprise when she first saw them, and Issei did not know why. He resolved that his new mission would help him discover what he truly was. In the end, the mission was to understand his identity and origins. Irina felt grateful to Gabriel for allowing her to accompany Issei on a mission that had worried Gabriel. Gabriel had said that Issei had suffered greatly after Irina left Kuo, and Irina felt guilty and determined to protect him. She knew Issei's tastes well from their shared childhood and understood his preference for simple things. She remembered the time 2 years ago when Issei had seen her and reacted as if she were a young man, which had surprised her. She had wondered about her feelings for him ever since a childhood rescue when something unfamiliar had stirred in her chest. She hoped to understand it soon. They prepared to leave the celestial realm and head to Kuo. Irina recalled Gabriel's request from earlier. Gabriel had spoken seriously and asked Irina to take care of Issei and accompany him properly. Irina had promised seriously but with a reassuring smile that she would not let anyone hurt him again. When Irina asked Gabriel about Issei's wings, Gabriel admitted she did not know the reason. Gabriel had told Irina that even Michael and the deity had never seen wings like Issei's and that their investigations over the past 2 years had yielded no answers. With that uncertainty, Irina went to join Issei. Now they arrived in Kuo. Nothing about the city had changed much in 15 years. Irina ran ahead toward the town, and Issei followed, amused and remembering the times they had played like this as children. They went to his house, and Irina knocked. His parents opened the door and were shocked and overwhelmed with emotion when they saw him. They cried and hugged him, expressing how worried they had been. Issei stood stunned as his mother wept and his father trembled with relief. Issei felt his own voice falter as he told them he had missed them very much. Not knowing what to say and glad at his parents' unusual warmth, Issei returned his mother's hug and went inside. After a long conversation with his parents about Irina, he showered and later went downstairs to speak with his mother about his true nature. Issei told his mother that he needed to talk. His mother, who was preparing tea in the kitchen, looked surprised when she saw him but soon smiled, set the teapot on the table, and invited him to sit. She then asked him what he needed. Issei told his mother he wanted to know what he really was and that he was sure she was an angel. His mother explained that she had planned to tell him when he turned 18, but it seemed someone had already told him. She admitted she could not say with complete certainty what he was, since she did not fully know herself. She told him that both she and his father were angels who had asked Archangel Gabriel for permission to live among humans and had chosen to raise a family there. She continued that when he was born they had been overjoyed and, for his sake, had decided to hide the truth. They had seen that he was not an ordinary angel and that he possessed an incredible power that appeared sealed, so they had raised him as humans to protect him. Issei then recounted the day he disappeared. He told his mother that after leaving school he had seen a dark, strange patch in the sky and had gone to investigate. In the flashback, Issei remembered leaving the academy exhausted, joking around with friends as usual. He had noticed what looked like rain far from the city, but its color was wrong purple and he decided to check it out. Near an abandoned house he had seen a person with 2 wings. He had found a girl who appeared trapped and then watched in shock as the winged figure formed a spear of light and struck the girl, who collapsed immediately. Terrified, he had fled, but the winged figure followed. Issei remembered shouting for help and calling the stranger a killer as he ran, hiding behind a tree, gasping from exhaustion. A spear of light had grazed his hair as the winged figure approached with a macabre smile. He ran toward the open fields, shouting at the stranger to leave him alone. He tripped and fell face first, and when he looked up he saw the attacker standing over him with a long black sword raised to strike. Just as he felt himself losing consciousness, he heard the attacker speak and then another voice. Issei recalled the attacker saying he had been sent to eliminate him because he was a threat to supernatural beings. The second voice rebuked the attacker for revealing his weapon in front of Issei. The attacker was then suddenly overcome and fell, defeated. Issei looked up and saw a second person, a blonde girl with snow-white skin who had interrupted the attack and helped him. From that moment, Issei's life had changed drastically. Back in the present, Issei told his mother that this was how he had met Gabriel and that Gabriel had offered him the opportunity to become her joker. His mother listened with shining eyes, hugged him, and then resumed her usual calm demeanor. She apologized for not realizing sooner and said she would apologize to Archangel Gabriel later, smiling as she went to the kitchen to clean. His mother then asked Issei to show his wings. Issei, a bit confused, unfurled his wings. 5 pairs of divine white wings, radiant like a glow of light, surprised his mother. She approached to touch them and examine them closely. His mother said that these wings were unlike any she had seen and that they were extraordinarily beautiful. She showed him her own wings, which were 6 pairs and looked more ordinary in comparison. She admitted she had no idea why his wings were so different, and her tone carried a hint of regret that she could not provide answers. Issei reassured her that he would find the answers and grow stronger. He hugged her, then headed up to his room because he was tired. Before leaving, he asked where his father was. She asked because she was curious. She had not seen him since they arrived home and he had been talking with Irina. He had gone to sleep a little while ago, and the speaker said she would also go to bed because she was tired, saying it sleepily and causing him to smile lightly before she went to her room to change and sleep. He decided to lie down because he was tired and was surprised to find Irina sleeping deeply in his bed. He covered her to keep her warm and slept beside the bed on the floor so as not to disturb her. Before he fell asleep, his mother entered. On seeing Irina in the bed and him lying nearby, she gave him an amused, knowing look and winked, which left him a little confused. Then she left and went to sleep quietly. From Irina's perspective, after Issei bathed and changed, she had come downstairs, but, seeing them talking like mother and son, she chose not to interfere and went to Issei's room. She had flopped onto his bed and, feeling safe and relaxed, fallen asleep. When she woke, she noticed someone caring for her and realized Issei was sleeping on an inflatable mattress beside the bed. She smiled at the situation and slipped down quietly to lie beside him. Issei woke and stammered in surprise, seeing Irina there. He blushed slightly and laughed nervously. Irina laughed at his reaction and asked playfully if it bothered him that she had slept in his bed. He answered that it did not bother him, but admitted he had been startled because of how casually she had slept. He became flustered and hugged her, his concern clear when he whispered that he had been worried after seeing her sleep so exhausted. Irina smiled and hugged him back to reassure him. He scolded her for worrying him, and Irina pointed out that she had simply slept in ordinary clothes. She then got up, put on her outfit, and prepared for their first day of classes. On a previous day, the teacher had announced that Irina and Issei would attend Crow Academy and handed them the academy uniforms. Irina had sighed at the thought of going, not wanting to, but accepted because she had no choice. At least she would be attending with Issei. The two went to school together, drawing curious looks and whispers from other students. Issei noticed something as soon as they arrived but decided not to alarm Irina. They went to the student council office, and Issei touched Irina to help conceal her presence because there were several demons present. He lowered her presence using sacred energy, a technique Gabriel had taught him to hide the aura of angels. Issei introduced himself as Hayate Issei, 19 years old, and asked to enroll. The council president nodded and then turned to look at Irina. Irina introduced herself as Shidu Irina, also 19, and bowed. The president gave them their passes, and they headed to what would be their classroom. Before entering, Issei motioned for Irina to speak quietly and warned her that there were demons around, so she should not do anything to draw attention. Irina acknowledged this, entered the classroom at the professor's nod, and Issei took a seat at the back by the window with her in front of him. After classes ended, they began to head home, though Issei sensed they were being followed. He grabbed Irina's arm and began to run, leading her to a hidden spot and keeping their presence low so they would not be discovered. There he saw a white-haired girl who appeared to be a first-year student searching the area in frustration. Irina noticed the girl too and understood why Issei had brought her there. He wondered why that girl had been following them and what she wanted. A few hours later, in an abandoned mansion, the white-haired girl spoke to others about what she had seen. She reported that she had been following Hayate Issei and Shido Irina when they suddenly ran to help after seeing a child get hurt. The girl described seeing another young woman who seemed connected to the church. This woman had a sacred gear called Twiling Healing. The church-affiliated woman had asked where the abandoned church was, and afterward the group had watched Issei and Irina go out to play at an arcade, eat ice cream, and spend time together at a park. After they parted ways, a fallen angel had appeared. The white-haired girl finished her report to a crimson-haired leader, who listened intently and then dismissed her with a polite nod. Left alone in the quiet room, the leader thought she needed to move quickly or someone else would claim what she sought. She paced the ruined parlor, considering how to bring those two brown-haired youths over to her side, and wondered if they were truly human as another had suspected. She addressed Akino, a black-haired woman tied in a ponytail who was sitting nearby playing chess and losing. Akino paused, waiting for instructions, while the leader contemplated her next move. Akino teased that the new student might have caught her mistress's interest, and the remark drew a brief, irritated glance from her mistress, who immediately denied it while staring out the window. The maid did not understand. Her mistress was not usually so expressive, and she could not tell what that boy had that held her attention. She left as soon as she was told. The mistress explained to Akino that it was not attraction but suspicion. She suspected the new student might possess a power she could turn to her advantage, and she intended to make him a pawn. She told Akino to tell Yuto to bring the student the next day. She planned to invite him to join and then reveal the truth. She fixed Akino with a cold, terrifying look that made the maid shiver before the maid retreated, leaving her mistress alone at the window. The mistress vowed that she would find him, learn who he was, and bring him into her retinue. Days later, Issei and another brown-haired companion walked toward an abandoned house a little way from where they lived. Issei slipped inside without making a sound, sensing a strange presence that set his nerves on edge. Irina nodded and followed him in. A roar filled the house and a voice spoke as the room lit with golden light. Issei saw a black-haired girl in a black kimono with cat-like pointed ears standing calmly. She approached without haste. Issei went on guard and the girl began to attack with bright spears of light and swift slashes of radiant energy. Irina did not move and formed a shimmering barrier tinged with a sickly glow. The barrier did not appear to harm Issei, though it affected him subtly, and the cat-eared girl increased her assault with more spears and a glowing sword, pressing forward with agile, relentless strikes. Issei noted her strange holy energy and felt uneasy. He tried to keep his distance because she seemed dangerous. Unnoticed by Issei, Irina drew her sword, the Excalibur mimic, one of the fragments of Excalibur that could change form. She used it skillfully but left openings that the opponent exploited. The cat-eared girl intensified the pressure on the barrier, blurring Irina's vision and forcing Irina to struggle. Concerned, Issei grew angry and launched himself at the opponent with a sudden feint of light, aiming to strike from behind, but she vanished. The cat-eared girl whispered that she used a spiritual technique to create false images and illusions, and she suggested that Issei had been complacent about his companion. Her whispered presence at his ear unnerved him, and the poisonous aura from her barrier began to creep into him, slowing him down and dulling his senses. Issei could not understand her strength. He felt certain he could not win without an advantage, but he attacked when he saw an opening and managed to knock her unconscious, causing her barrier to waver. Issei then realized something behind him and froze. The cat-eared girl returned, furious, and struck him with a surge of sacred energy he could not avoid. The blow landed, and Irina lay unconscious nearby. Issei thought he might not make it. He had been careless and felt foolish for allowing himself to be caught off guard. Soft whispers urged him to wake, and Issei was surprised to recognize the voice as the cat-eared girl's. He tried to rise and lash out, but she grabbed his arm and gently pushed him back onto a nearby bed. She scolded him for the state of his battered body, and the pain hit him suddenly. He groaned and turned his head. She sighed but did not scold further, instead sitting beside him and placing a glass of juice within reach. Issei asked if she was one of the spirit beings Gabriel had mentioned. She confirmed that she was a spirit creature and asked him, in turn, what he was. Issei replied that he was Issei, an angel and the joker of Seraphine Gabriel. She smiled and said she liked that he was strong, teasing that Gabriel had chosen well for his joker. She also mentioned that Irina was in another room. He remembered Gabriel's advice, to be kind and polite to people he met, especially to women, but not to go overboard. The memory settled over him as he kept watch on the calm, attentive spirit beside him. Gabriel taught Issei how to perform a proper formal bow. After many attempts, Gabriel reluctantly spent nearly 5 hours instructing him until he finally learned. Gabriel then went over everything they knew about the demonic world and the fallen angels, explaining the current cadres and Maos as well as the ancients. Issei memorized the 72 houses and the extras until he was exhausted so that the next day Gabriel could tell him everything about the angels, their ranks, and their powers. Issei did not always understand, but he kept asking Gabriel about both current and ancient matters. Gabriel also recounted the history of the last great battle between the three factions. The three sides had clashed in a catastrophic confrontation that toppled a supreme being and devastated many angels, fallen angels, and demons, including the 4 ancient Mahus. The account left Issei perplexed and emotionally shaken. Gabriel recognized his pain and held him for a few minutes. Miguel, the seraphim and leader of heaven, watched them with a gentle smile, hoping Issei might bring Gabriel greater happiness in time. Miguel turned away with a quiet laugh, and Gabriel flushed at being noticed. The following days were filled with practice and strain for Issei. He trained with Gabriel repeatedly, and to Gabriel's surprise he learned to shape his light into something almost divine. Miguel was astonished at Issei's progress. When Issei concentrated his light, it had the potential to harm even Gabriel. Gabriel noticed this, smiled proudly, and kept silent. Later, Issei was brooding and confused when a yokai entered and bowed. Kuroka introduced herself as a Nikomata, specifically a Nekashu, and mentioned that her sister was also a Nikomata. Kuroka explained that she was a renegade demon because she had murdered her former master and that she was currently staying with Hakuyuko. She said she had recently received an invitation to a temple where the Seraphim of Heaven had tasked her with teaching Issei senjutsu and assessing his hidden power. Kuroka then, in a playful manner, declared that she wanted him to be her husband. Gabriel had apparently offered this on his behalf, which made Issei sigh at the idea but did not upset him deeply. Kuroka also told Irina that she knew about Irina's sword and suggested that Irina was angry because she had approached Issei. Kuroka's teasing made Irina flare up with jealousy, and the two engaged in a tense exchange that worried Issei for a moment before it became nothing more than a heated argument. Issei found Kuroka's sudden proposal and her melancholy smile curious. She had described herself as a renegade, which explained the sadness in her eyes. She smiled at him as if nothing were wrong, and Issei felt a faint, puzzling familiarity as though he had known her before. He wondered whether she had accepted marriage so quickly. Because she already knew him, or because she sought something else. The strange conversation left him unsettled. Issei went home with Irina. The day had been exhausting and unusual. At home, Irina looked at him with concern. He stroked her hair and reassured her that he was fine. He appreciated how much she cared for him and felt grateful to have her in his life. Despite that warmth, he noticed someone's watchful gaze from a distance and sensed things growing more complicated. The idea of a potential spouse felt surreal, but he resolved to discover the platinum-haired woman's identity and begin training with Kuroka the next day. For now, he went to sleep, exhausted and determined to learn who he truly was. Issei woke in an unfamiliar, empty place and found himself disoriented. He looked around and felt the room held no obvious exit. Panic rose in him. He summoned his wings and discovered they responded. The situation did not feel like a normal dream, and fear began to take hold. He started running, searching for a way out. A deep voice spoke from behind, commenting that he appeared to be an angel bearer and a weak one at that, and that this place might be a test. The voice suggested that it had watched him since birth and that Issei was an exceedingly rare kind of being, rarer even than those forged by endless war. The whisper sent a chill down his spine. Issei demanded to know who spoke and tried to illuminate the space with his light to reveal the speaker. The surroundings reacted strangely to his power, bathing everything in a strange, flickering glow. In front of him, two crimson eyes fixed on him, and the hint of scales could be seen. A dragon rose into view, its presence commanding but not overtly hostile, and its gaze seemed to invite him to approach. So he slowly and carefully approached the strange being who, for some reason, felt familiar. The being introduced himself as Draig, the Crimson Emperor Dragon and a celestial dragon. Draig opened his jaws and breathed a small sigh of fire to intimidate him, and he asked if the young man was afraid. Issei calmed himself when he realized the dragon meant no harm and responded that he was IsseixHarem, the Joker of Gabriel and a seraphim of heaven. Issei admitted he had no idea what Draig meant by calling him a host, and he asked why the dragon was still alive. Draig laughed, observed that Issei knew who he was and had some understanding of his reputation from the last war between the three great factions, and said he was glad his host was not as foolish as he had expected. Draig warned Issei not to tell anyone about him and not to try to summon him, explaining that he needed to see something inside Issei. He emphasized that Issei was currently inside his own mind speaking with him and assured him that Draig was completely real. Then Draig glanced at him with a playful look and disappeared. Issei tried to follow, but his eyes closed. When he opened them, he was in his room and found Irina and Kuroka hugging him tightly. He tried to slip out of bed quietly, but they held him fast. He sighed, still baffled by the strange encounter. Issei wondered what Draig had meant by saying there was something bothering him inside Issei and resolved that he would have to see the dragon again and find out why Draig considered him his host. Gabriel had once told him that Draig and the White Dragon had died when the three great factions united in war, so the dragon's presence in his mind was confusing. He did not dwell on it and woke the girls. They changed reluctantly and they all left together for the academy. At the academy, Issei sensed several demonic presences. A brown-haired girl watched him from a distance. Issei recognized her as a high-class demon but chose to ignore her so as not to draw attention. He headed to class. When he opened the classroom door, Motohama and Matsuda lunged at him. They tried to hit him while accusing him angrily of always walking with Irina. Issei rose and told them to leave him alone, explaining that he was only Irina's friend and declining to escalate the situation. He sat down and noticed Irina seemed nervous. When the professor had not yet arrived, Issei quietly asked Irina if something was wrong. Irina nearly jumped at the question, then explained with a small smile that Zenobia was expected in a few weeks for a mission assigned by the church. Issei asked who Zenobia was. Irina whispered that Zenobia was an exorcist like her and her teammate, and that she had been tasked with stopping Kokabile, a cadre of Grigori. The professor entered the room and the conversation ended. Issei remembered that on their first day at the academy, he had sensed the presence of two high-class demons and another power greater than theirs that did not feel demonic. He now understood that the greater presence might be related to this news, though he still wondered why an exorcist would face a cadre of Grigori. After classes, Issei walked home with Irina. She told him she had received a message from Zenobia and planned to visit her, so she would return home later. Issei nodded and continued home alone. The sky darkened suddenly, and he went on guard. He sensed a supernatural power that did not feel demonic. Turning, he saw a figure in the air with two pairs of wings and a spear of light aimed at him. Issei moved with ease, dodging the spear thanks to training that had sharpened his reactions and agility. The fallen angel above him appeared surprised that Issei had avoided the attack so effortlessly. The fallen angel taunted him, questioning what a low-ranked angel was doing in that territory and calling him trash. The fallen angel then hurled multiple spears of light, which Issei avoided with fluid, practiced motions. Frustrated, the fallen angel closed in. Issei unfolded his own wings, slipped behind the attacker, and manifested a sword of light in his left hand. He struck the angel across the back with the flat of the blade, sending the attacker crashing to the ground. Issei explained that he had only been heading home and that the fallen angel had ruined his day. Issei laughed a little at the opponent's attempt to use his own body as a shield, thinking the effort had been pathetic. The strike from Issei's cloak of light left the attacker staggered with only a few superficial scratches. Issei moved quickly, delivering a blow to the stomach that knocked the wind out of him, then slipped behind and summoned a blade of light that disabled his wings. The attacker screamed in pain and unleashed a barrage of light spears. Issei evaded them easily, which only enraged the attacker more as he charged. The attacker continued to rain down spears of light, forcing Issei to raise a shield. The shield began to crack under the relentless assault. Issei worried that his shield would not hold for long. He had little practice with defensive shields and magic. He decided he had to end the fight quickly and use the technique Kuroka had taught him earlier. Flashback to training. Kuroka encouraged Issei, telling him she believed he could concentrate sacred power through spiritual energy. She urged him to try creating a sphere of spiritual power. Issei, exhausted from using so much sacred energy, protested that he only knew how to produce ordinary angelic power, but he focused and gathered everything he had. His effort made his wings flare as he poured his remaining strength into the attempt. Kuroka watched seriously as a pure energy began to emanate from him. The light grew until she had to shield her eyes. When the glow subsided, she saw that he had managed something remarkable. A silhouette of a young figure with pale hair, white ears and tail, and great luminous wings, the manifestation of the power Issei had reached. Kuroka smiled, surprised and impressed by his potential. Issei collapsed from exhaustion, and Kuroka confirmed with a nod that he had succeeded. She helped him to bed and, after explaining things briefly to a concerned brunette who crossed their path, left him to rest. Kuroka reflected on how interesting he was and that Gabriel had not been wrong to take an interest in him. 1 hour later, Issei woke to find Kuroka watching over him. He felt embarrassed but asked how long he had slept. Kuroka said it had been an hour and remarked that what he had done was just the beginning. She decided to teach him how to create a defensive barrier that could protect him in emergencies or buy him time against an opponent. She estimated he could learn it quickly now that he had unlocked his spiritual power. Kuroka demonstrated by forming a barrier that produced an overpowering smell, a reminder that some defensive techniques could have unpleasant side effects. She showed him the method step by step. To his surprise, Issei mastered the barrier in about 15 minutes, though it left him very tired. Not being a supernatural being himself made the technique harder to sustain, but he had learned enough for practical use. After the training, he went to sleep satisfied. And a flashback. Back in the battle, Issei felt his shield fracture and strained to form the defensive barrier Kuroka had taught him. He managed to bring it into being, though it took all his concentration. He watched the attacker begin to cough, a sign that the earlier poison or disruptive effect was finally taking hold. Seizing the opportunity, Issei gathered a concentrated surge of light and released it as a focus strike that incapacitated the attacker. The opponent collapsed, incapacitated but not described in graphic detail. Exhausted, Issei decided it was time to return home. A few demons lingered nearby, but he slipped away before having to explain himself. He planned to go home to eat and rest. When Issei arrived, he found Kuroka cooking. He stood surprised at how well the cat spirit could handle the kitchen. He simply informed her that he had returned. Kuroka nodded slightly and invited him to sit. He accepted eagerly, hungry and exhausted. Kuroka asked whether the barrier had helped him, laughing softly in a way that confused him at first, but he assumed she had sensed his presence and did not worry. She had introduced herself to his parents before they went on vacation. They were supposedly away for a few weeks, so he had not given it much thought. His mother had reacted strangely when she saw the cat spirit, even saying she wanted Kuroka to be his wife. Kuroka explained everything and his parents took it in stride. He found it odd to discover his parents were angels when he had always assumed they were human. He admitted that defense was not his strong suit and that the barrier had been a lifesaver. He reflected that provoking enemies was a bad idea, especially after being left in such a state by a fallen angel who had done him no direct harm. He laughed a little with Kuroka and then asked about a dream that had been bothering him since that morning. He explained that in the dream he had been in complete darkness and the Welsh dragon Drake had told him he was his bearer. Drake had warned him not to summon or tell anyone and had said he would appear when the time was right. He described this seriously while watching Kuroka's amused and slightly puzzled expression. Kuroka admitted she was surprised he was the security and pleased that he trusted her. She reached out and gently touched his cheek in a comforting gesture. She went on to explain that Drake was one of the heavenly dragons, like Valle, who led the group she belonged to. At some point he would face Valle, since they were natural enemies. She found it odd that the Welsh dragon chose not to reveal his identity while the current Hakuryuko was already known. He listened closely, wanting to learn more. He decided he would wait until he saw Drake again and asked Kuroka if he could trust her. He said she was the only one he had told and that he wanted to trust her. Kuroka nodded and smiled. Went to sleep soon after, exhausted and hoping the next day would be better. The next day, Issei was in class, lost in thought, when someone called his name. A blonde boy stood beside him. Issei immediately sensed that he was a demon. The blonde asked if he was Hayato Issei and said the student council president requested his presence urgently. His announcement caused the girls in the classroom to start whispering among themselves, which Issei ignored. Before he could respond, Irina appeared at his side and wrapped her arms around him. Irina told the blonde that if Issei agreed to go, she would accompany him, and if not, she would stay with him. The blonde sighed, agreed, and guided Issei and Irina to a building that looked abandoned from the outside. When they entered, the blonde informed the person inside that he had brought the president's guest. The door opened to reveal an elaborately decorated interior. In the center of the room there was a sigil he recognized immediately, the crest of House Gremory. On a large sofa sat a red-haired girl who matched his expectations. He realized the houses present were Citri and Gremory, which often worked together, information he remembered from training with Gabriel during his 2 years in the Heaven training program. Irina pressed closer to him, unsettled by the red-haired girl's presence. The red-haired girl asked politely why she had been called. She explained that she wanted to meet Issei in person and intended to make a proposal because she had a mild interest in him. She glanced at Irina, clearly assessing her. The red-haired girl then asked who Irina was. Irina introduced herself formally as Issei's childhood friend and a recent transfer to Kuo Academy. The red-haired girl examined Irina for a moment and then led them further inside. A dark-haired girl with a ponytail who had been sitting beside the redhead invited them to make themselves comfortable. Issei noticed that everyone in the room was a demon, though he also detected the aura of a yokai among them, the same white-haired yokai who had followed him once before. His training with Kuroka had taught him to read auras, so he could distinguish humans, supernatural classes, and yokai more easily now. Issei asked what they wanted from him and what the proposal was. The red-haired girl cut to the point and requested that he join her retinue. She added that Irina could join as well if she wished. Issei had suspected something like this might happen, but he had not expected the redhead to include Irina in the offer. Issei saw an opportunity to extract information and decided to ask why Rias wanted them to join her retinue. He pretended confusion and surprise as he asked why she wanted them to become part of her group. Rias explained that they had noticed signs that he might possess a sacred gear, an artifact created by God during the last war between the 3 great factions. She added that, since his companion Irina had come along without hesitation, she suspected Irina might be hiding something too. Rias opened her wings to demonstrate that she and her attendants were demons. Both Irina and Issei were startled by how quickly her wings unfolded, but they kept playing along to hear more. Rias described sacred gears as powerful artifacts designed for humans because the gods feared the humans would be defenseless if any faction turned on them. She said that the strongest of these artifacts are called Longinus, weapons that can exceed normal limits and even threaten gods. Rias's retinue had been observing Issei and believed he had something special, possibly a sacred gear. She produced pieces that looked like chess pawns and knights, and Issei remembered being told that demons have a system to reincarnate humans into demons using items called evil pieces. These chess-like pieces seemed to be that system. Rias offered Issei a place in her retinue and the chance to become a demon, promising to protect him and help him grow strong. As she rose from her seat and sat before him with a chess piece in hand, she smiled, but when Riser Phoenix arrived and spoke with an arrogant tone, the mood shifted. Issei felt Irina cling to his side and took her hand, ready for whatever came next, as Riser and Rias exchanged venomous glares. Riser announced that he had come to remind Rias of their engagement. Rias answered fiercely that she would not marry him, and their exchange grew dangerously heated until a platinum-haired maid intervened, using a calm presence to defuse them both. The maid sat quietly and watched as Riser continued to taunt Rias, who grew increasingly frustrated and shouted that she would not marry him. Rias argued that pure-blood demons had dwindled since the last war and that, without this marriage, House BGMI might face extinction, especially with Rias as its next heir. Riser insisted he would not allow her to embarrass his family, the Phoenix lineage. Issei found the whole pronouncement absurd and was barely keeping a straight face. Rias responded that she would marry someone but not Riser. The maid, expecting this outcome, presented a solution. The dispute would be resolved through an officially sanctioned rating game, approved by Surzex. Riser accepted the challenge, confident and provocative. Riser then looked toward the humans present with a lascivious expression directed at Irina. Issei reacted angrily at the way Riser stared at Irina and warned him not to involve them. Riser laughed and, assuming Rias's retinue was weak, declared that when he won he would take that girl for himself, pointing to Irina and ignoring Issei. To emphasize his point, he snapped his fingers and summoned 12 more women to his side, evidently members of his retinue. Issei noted one blonde with twin tails who resembled another person nearby and who looked at him with clear disdain. He guessed she might be Riser's sister. He provoked the man he mockingly called Yakitori, warning him not to approach Irina. Yakitori reacted aggressively and sent a sky-blue-haired girl rushing at Issei with a wooden spear. Issei easily dodged and sent her flying into a wall with a non-lethal, decisive strike. He told Yakitori again, more firmly, not to come near Irina. Yakitori challenged Issei to fight in the rating game to decide who would win Irina's fate. Issei ignored the taunt and turned to the platinum-haired maid, asking her to request Surzex's permission so that he could take part in the battle. He promised that if he won, Rias could cancel the engagement and his companion would not be claimed by Riser. The maid nodded, somewhat puzzled but agreeable. With tensions momentarily settled, Yakitori and the maid departed. Issei decided it was late and that he should take Irina home. He did not want Kuroka waiting for him. When the two Browns returned, neither spoke. Rias also did not know what to say when she saw how Issei had answered her questions and demonstrated his strength. When Irina arrived before Issei entered, she tugged his sleeve to make him turn. Summoning all her courage, she pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. Issei became flustered and blushed. Irina offered that it was a simple thank you for protecting her, although she quietly knew it came from something deeper he made her feel. Issei, struggling for words, promised that he would always protect her and smiled awkwardly while scratching the back of his head. Irina smiled back, and they entered the house together. The next day Issei told Kuroka what had happened. Kuroka became more worried than he had expected and even shed a few tears, which made him glad but guilty for causing her concern. 5 days had passed since he had mentioned the rating game with that imposter demon. He spent those days training with Kuroka because in a few hours he intended to check on the BGMI's training. He also thought about visiting the nun he had met after returning to the human world and wondered how she was doing. Kuroka instructed him to concentrate and to prevent the sword from destabilizing with the spirit technique. She emphasized that he needed to stabilize his power as much as possible so his spiritual energy would not deplete too quickly. Over recent days she had taught him many things. In terms of magic and spiritual energy, he was almost on par with her. His only real problem was that he could not sustain a fight for more than 5 minutes because his power was unstable when he released an attack. Issei answered that he was trying and pushed himself to focus. He had already been holding the sword steady for 9 minutes and did not want to ruin the progress. He concentrated more on channeling his energy without overexerting himself. Kuroka had warned that if he forced his body too hard he could reach a complete drain that would leave him exhausted for weeks, barely able to stay awake for more than a couple of hours. The effort burned and hurt, but Issei reminded himself he was doing it to grow stronger and protect others. The thought of Irina facing that foolish demon made him endure the pain. From Kuroka's point of view, Issei had advanced a great deal, but his weakness remained the instability of his power. He could not sustain long combat, and previously she was able to incapacitate him with a relatively small expenditure of energy after about 5 minutes. She had given him a sword he had to stabilize with his own power in imitation of Excalibur so he would learn to control the energy involved. If he lost control of the sword's balance, the feedback would overwhelm and severely exhaust him. It surprised her that, despite his instability and the gradual strain on his body, he continued to push himself and was now making real progress. She smiled inwardly. Of the little she had come to know him, he was not someone to underestimate. She liked getting to know her future husband more every day. When he told her about the raiding game with a high-class demon, she had been concerned, but she believed he could win if he continued improving. Kuroka noted that although the sword was meant to be sacred, its power had a strange edge similar to a dragon-slaying weapon. Remembering that Issei had said he was the bearer of the red dragon celestial, she suspected why the sword affected him differently. She increased the sword's demonic energy slightly to force him to raise his power near its limit. Issei felt the strain acutely and told himself he had to use everything or the sword would overwhelm him. He closed his eyes and poured every reserve into stabilizing the blade while keeping the spiritual energy contained within himself rather than fully expelling it. Slowly the sword steadied. Kuroka watched with a satisfied smile as Issei, utterly exhausted, finally let himself collapse from fatigue. Kuroka praised him for stabilizing his power by learning to keep the spiritual energy in his body long enough for it to settle instead of releasing it all at once. She noted that his power had increased considerably after those 5 hours of intense training and told him to take a bath and rest, assuming the effort had been truly exhausting. Kuroka helped him up and took his arm. He blushed slightly at the close contact but accepted her help and went to bathe and sleep, too drained to protest. The next day he prepared to speak with Kiba Yudo, the blonde demon known as the Prince of Kuro, whom he had met the day the raiding game had been arranged. The brown-haired man taught Issei the few sword techniques he knew and, above all, how to improve his defense. A few minutes earlier they had had a quick duel in which the blonde had lost because Issei had formed a barrier that launched several spears of light. The opponent had been forced to dodge. Focused on the spears and unaware they were an illusion, he had turned his back and the brown-haired man had appeared behind him, striking with the edge of a light blade and ending the fight instantly. Back in the present, Issei did not notice that a redhead was watching him from a distance. She approached with a dark-haired woman beside her, both staring intently. Rias thanked Issei for helping with Razor and asked whether he could handle him, adding that her doubts were beginning to clear because he was clearly not an ordinary human and had even helped Kiba without difficulty. Issei explained that he was basically a human with supernatural powers and that this should help. He clarified that he knew about the 3 factions, dragons, gods, various kinds of yokai, ghosts, and alternate realities. He added that Miguel and the Seraphim had taught him a lot about the current world and the supernatural. At first it had been overwhelming, but he had grown accustomed to the knowledge and was now well informed about many factions, including a new one that he understood included Ophis. He shifted his attention when he spotted a sword headed his way. He jumped back and formed a barrier to his left after seeing an arrow charged with sacred power aimed at the person attacking him. Irina, who had been attacking for several seconds, pouted in frustration at being unable to defeat him. Issei had fought her before at Gabriel's command and had defeated her easily, proving that his senses were only part of his training. He matched her almost evenly with sword skill. The angelic blood she carried gave her sharper vision in daylight and heightened senses, and her presence became stronger in the light. Issei observed that he had known she was there for minutes because she never tried to hide her presence, and he already recognized her repeated attacking patterns. He smiled as he described this, and Irina moved to his side. Both Irina and the redhead looked surprised when the dark-haired woman drew near. The brown-haired man registered something even stranger. He realized the dark-haired woman was the daughter of a friend of the Grigori governor, a fact that conflicted with the information Gabriel had given him about her escape and her unexpected alliance with the Gremri. The dark-haired woman's expression turned to fury. She gathered lightning in her hands and darkened the sky with thunderclouds to hurl bolts at them. Issei dodged and avoided the worst of the storm. The dark-haired woman shouted that she was not to be confused with someone else and insisted that the man in question was not her father. She sent more lightning, but Issei used a kind of spiritual technique that Kuroka had taught him. The spiritual arts could take different forms to freeze the bolts and prevent them from striking. He did not want to hurt her, but the group reacted with alarm when he summoned an arrow in his hands. They were surprised both by the weapon's power and by the fact that he had known the dark-haired woman's identity despite her fury and confusion. Calling upon a technique he named the Arrow of Paradise linked to the King of Lightning, Issei formed a magical circle and empowered the arrow with a vertical whirl of wind around it. The wind current, charged with lightning, struck the dark-haired woman at high speed in an anime-style burst of energy and left her unconscious. The redhead moved quickly and caught her before she could fall to the ground, panic written across her face. Rias called Akino's name, alarmed, but Issei approached calmly and reassured them that Akino was only unconscious. Relieved, Rias carried Akino to a nearby house and laid her on a bed to rest. Rias then asked the angel and the brown-haired man to follow so they could sit in a room and proceed with questioning. Rias wondered what the arrow had been and how Issei could possibly know Akino. She decided she needed to extract all the information she could and wanted him in her retinue as soon as possible now that she knew he was strong and had protected her from Razor. Seated across from him in the house near the camp, Rias asked how he knew Akino. Issei replied that he knew many things about all the factions and kept up with important developments. He said he knew who Rias's brother was and who the Citri girl's sister was. He also knew Akino's mother and her father, Baraquil, who was affiliated with Grigori and was the best friend of Azazel, the leader. Rias then turned to the dark-haired woman and asked why she was always accompanying Issei if she was an exorcist. She found it unsettling that someone from the church would be in demon territory. The dark-haired woman nodded and revealed her sword, showing that it was a fragment of Excalibur. She introduced herself as Irina Shidu, an exorcist and a psychic, and stated that she served as a representative of the church. Irina had come by order of the Catholic High Command, accompanied in spirit by her companion Zenobia, who was not present because her mission was to recover other fragments of Excalibur that the fallen angels had stolen. Irina had permission from the seraphim Gabriel to attend with Issei, her childhood friend, and she had also been sent to warn them not to interfere with church matters. The fragment she carried was the Excalibur mimic, a blade that could assume any form Irina desired. Zenobia had smiled as she explained the shard's nature, and Irina had frowned at the thought, finding the whole situation hard to believe and insulting to her brother, the demon lord Lucifer, and to demons in general. Irina responded angrily, insisting that demons would never cooperate with the fallen angels, who were neutral enemies, and that as the future leader of the Gremri clan she had to make clear that collaborating with them over possession of swords was not something demons would do. Issei, who had stood up at her tone, clarified that Irina's point was simply that the others should not meddle in matters that could directly affect them. He said the church did not want another exhausting third war, especially since the one responsible for the theft was Kokabil, a warlord among the Grigori. Added that he had come to help because their chances of recovering the stolen fragments and defeating Kokabil were below 30% and might as well be suicide. The seriousness of Issei's assessment made Irina calm and think. She acknowledged that confronting a cadre like Kokabil would require an enormous power advantage. Irina asked Issei what their chances would be with him on their side, puzzled and worried. Issei admitted he could not be certain, but believed that the three of them together might be able to win without anyone being seriously hurt. He gave a quick, confident gesture of assurance that eased Irina's tension. Issei then urged her to focus on improving as a king and on helping her servants, asking to be allowed to face Razor in the raiding game. He explained that his motivation included hatred of those who forced others to change and then pretended it earned their affection, and he vowed firmly that he would not allow anyone to harm Irina. One day later, Issei was alone in his room after apologizing to Aquino and thinking about the week's events. He noticed his arm beginning to glow strangely, as if it were burning without pain. The glow pulled him into a dark dimensional space where he heard a familiar voice, the same one that had come from the dragon before. He called for Drake, and a crimson light coalesced into the enormous, fire-breathing dragon he had seen previously. Drake observed that Issei had grown stronger since their last encounter and asked whether anyone had told him what Drake had said before. The dragon remarked on the presence of a Nikomata but otherwise focused on Issei. Issei sat calmly across from the dragon and demanded to know what Drake wanted. The dragon laughed and explained that he did not want anything from Issei, rather, he wanted to present himself to his companion and offer the possibility of restoring Issei's memories and full power. Issei, surprised and confused, asked if Drake knew who he truly was. Drake admitted uncertainty, saying he had sensed a strange energy when they first spoke and that he still did not fully know Issei's identity, perhaps only 5%. Despite the lack of certainty, Drake promised they would discover Issei's true nature together and offered to allow Issei to use his power. The dragon spoke with pride and determination, declaring they would show that no one should ever trifle with a celestial dragon. They struck a symbolic pact and Issei returned to reality with a new understanding. He now suspected he was the Sekiryutai, as Kuroka had once suggested. With that in mind, he resolved to focus on the upcoming raiding game, which was only a couple of days away. The next day, after school, Issei was distracted by everything that had happened. Irina and he had visited the future leader of the Citri clan earlier, and afterwards Irina went to the home of her friend Zenobia, whom she had promised Issei he would meet soon. With Irina gone, Issei spent the rest of the afternoon walking around, thinking about the challenges ahead and the alliances that would be needed. Issei found himself thinking about what Drake had told him earlier, when the dragon had taught him to summon the booster gear. Drake had said Issei had unlocked it through his hard training in recent days and that his power was high enough to use the booster gear without problem. He smiled at the thought as he walked, still replaying the lesson in his head. Without looking, Issei bumped into someone. When he looked up, he recognized the blonde girl he had met on his first day. He helped her to her feet and apologized for being distracted. Asia introduced herself as Asia Argento and thanked him warmly, explaining she had never been able to properly thank him and his friend for what they had done before. Issei confirmed her identity and reminded her that he was Issei Hyodo, saying he had met her a few days earlier with a friend. Asia beamed, clearly relieved and grateful. Issei found her kindness and devotion touching and felt an easy smile form on his face. A short time later, they were sharing ice cream on a park bench. Asia talked about her life and Issei learned more about her. He remembered Miguel had mentioned a maiden and realized it was Asia. Her life had been difficult. She had joined the fallen angels for reasons that now made sense to him. Issei worried for her, suspecting they would try to take her sacred gear, and he resolved not to let that happen. At the park, Asia said she only wanted friends, to plant flowers with them, and to pray. Issei told her kindly that he would be her friend and promised they could do all the things she longed for. Asia cried with joy and nodded, making Issei equally happy. The moment felt fragile, as if it could be ruined at any second. A fallen angel appeared, commanding Asia to return and speaking with an arrogance and malice that made Issei uneasy. The fallen angel showed no intention of treating Asia kindly. Asia looked ready to comply, but Issei stepped forward to stop her. Issei challenged the fallen angel, asking why she should be denied the choice to live as she wished and whether the fallen angel believed herself to have the right to decide the fate of others. The fallen angel responded angrily, unfurling a pair of wings in a show of power. She formed several spears of light and launched them, but Issei easily dodged them. He created a barrier to protect Asia, who stood behind him, and prepared the special arrow Gabriel had given him. Gabriel had told him the arrow would help conceal his true angelic power and that only Issei could wield it. Issei invoked the arrow of paradise and summoned a gust of wind toward the fallen angel. It turned out to be an illusion. Issei moved behind her while she was distracted and struck swiftly, disarming her and knocking one set of her wings free in a dramatic, fast-paced exchange that resembled an intense anime battle. The fallen angel cried out and collapsed, rendered unconscious by the blow. Issei told Asia they should go home. She looked at him with happiness as they left together. He felt he had done the right thing by protecting her, though he had not wanted to eliminate the fallen angel in front of Asia. Instead, Issei used a small amount of sacred magic to alter her memories, ensuring she would not cause further trouble in the near term. Back at the house, Kuroka watched Asia closely. Issei asked Asia to introduce herself properly. Asia bowed and repeated her name politely. Kuroka introduced herself as Kuroka Tuju, smiling and expressing hope that they would all get along. Then Kuroka teasingly asked whether Asia and Issei were becoming close. Asia blushed deeply, and Issei laughed, amused by her innocence. They shared a light evening, laughing at Kuroka's playful remarks, and Issei decided to give Asia a room in his large 4-story house. Later that night, Issei could not sleep and got up to get some juice. He noticed Kuroka also awake, but her expression was distant and troubled. Concerned, Issei asked if something was wrong. Kuroka admitted she had doubts about whether helping Asia had been the right choice and then confessed a painful part of her past. She had once served a high-ranking demon who treated her poorly and sometimes struck her. She said that on one occasion the demon had threatened to strike Chiron. Her name was Kaneko Tuju, and she was Kuroka's little sister. Kaneko had always been innocent, and Kuroka had only wanted to protect her. Kuroka had killed their master and fled, arranging for Kaneko to escape because she had been hunted as a renegade demon and feared they would kill the child. The weight of that choice ate at her. Kuroka believed she had done wrong and feared Kaneko must hate her now. She thought of herself as a terrible sister and broke down in tears. Issei comforted Kuroka, holding her as she cried. He told her that she was not a bad sister and that what she had done had been to protect Kaneko. He said he knew where Kaneko was, serving the Gremory family and in perfect condition. He acknowledged that Kaneko might now be afraid or resentful because of her power, but Issei insisted that deep down Kaneko loved Kuroka and knew she had not acted out of malice. He swore he was not lying and urged Kuroka to believe that she was a good person. Kuroka trembled and asked if he was telling the truth. Issei reassured her again, calling her a kind and strong person. He reminded her that he had only known her for a short time but had seen her care for family and friends, her sense of responsibility, and her determination to find solutions even in hardship. He told her she should not cry over something she had endured and urged her to keep moving forward. He hugged her and patted her head until she calmed. Kuroka murmured her thanks, relaxed against him, and eventually fell asleep in his arms. Issei smiled and remained still, sipping a little juice while she rested. 2 days passed. The day before, Kuroka had trained hard, and Issei had trained with Irina. Issei decided to call Kaneko so the sisters could sort things out before the upcoming raiding game. It was not a perfect solution, but he did not like seeing Kuroka so distressed. He simply wanted both of them to reunite and try to mend what had been broken. Flashback. Kaneko walked through the park, wondering whether Issei really had senjutsu, since his power had seemed similar during training. Her phone rang. It was Issei. He asked if she was free and invited her to his house. She accepted and went. At Issei's house, Kaneko knocked and he opened the door with a smile, inviting her in. The living room was comfortable though not as opulent as some others she had seen. Issei asked her to sit and then stepped away briefly. When he returned, Kaneko's attention snapped to another figure in the room, Kuroka. Shocked and angry, Kaneko demanded what Kuroka was doing there. She felt intimidated and hurt at seeing the sister who, in her eyes, had brought so much pain into her life. Issei urged both women to sit and listen. He explained that Kuroka had taught him the spiritual technique Kaneko had noticed during training and that he was grateful to her for that guidance. He told Kaneko that Kuroka had revealed the whole truth about what had happened and why she had left, and he wanted Kaneko to hear Kuroka's side. Issei made clear that neither he nor Kuroka would force Kaneko to forgive. He only asked that she listen. Kaneko agreed to listen but demanded honesty. Issei left the room, leaving the two sisters alone. Kuroka trembled. Kaneko noticed and waited as Kuroka took a deep breath and began to speak. When Issei had told Kuroka to wait in his room and then called her down, she had never expected to encounter Chiron again. She had been nervous and sorrowful at the thought of revealing the truth. Kuroka remembered how, when she had left before, she had said terrible things and run away in tears. She felt disgusted with herself and did not want to revisit those memories. Kuroka thought this would be her last chance to be forgiven by her sister and decided to tell her everything. Kuroka remembered that when they had been with their master, he had been kind and caring, and many sought to be in his retinue because they were among the few of their kind left. Their species did not mingle with humans for generations, which had put them at risk of extinction several times. Their master had protected them and treated them gently until one mission changed everything. In the flashback, the master rallied his servants and urged them to defeat the reincarnated demon. Kuroka launched her most dangerous barrier bomb attack because the monstrous enemy had not seemed weak. Her companions also unleashed their best powers, and Chiron stayed behind her. A loud explosion signaled that the creature had fallen. They were on a mission in Northern Europe fighting a renegade demon. That had been too dangerous. For a moment they believed it was over. The team cheered, but then Kuroka saw her teammate beginning to collapse. She and Chiron rushed to her side and used their remaining energy to stabilize her and stop the bleeding. The injured teammate could not continue, but their master lay several meters away, having been knocked back by the monster. Kuroka ran to him, relieved to see him smiling weakly as he coughed. She turned and saw the others finishing the fight against the beast. Everyone gathered around the master, but he did not wake. Believing the mission had ended, they prepared to return. Kaneko went with Kuroka because they had thought the battle would not be too difficult. They had faced renegade demons before but never one that proved so strong, and none of them expected it to survive Kuroka's full power attack. Only the master had been able to withstand that force, and though he had been slightly wounded, they thought he would recover. A week later, everything changed. The master became someone darker and cruel. He began attacking and mistreating the women without exception. When he woke the day after the mission, his behavior was hostile and frightening. Kuroka suspected that the beast they had faced had infected him with something, but she did not know what to do and refused to attack him. She was not that kind of person. Kuroka and Kaneko discussed what to do and tried to find a way to end the nightmare. The master called Kuroka to him, and she approached trembling, unsure of his intent. She explained that she did not want to hurt him, and because he was their master she could not simply strike him without becoming a renegade, which she had no desire to be. The master stepped closer and slapped her. Kuroka looked at him in disbelief as he pushed her to the ground, leaving her in pain. Her companions hurried to intervene. One begged the master to calm down and said he was not himself. He shoved that companion aside and grew angrier, lashing out at the others. The master declared that they were worthless and told Kuroka that he would make her suffer for refusing what he demanded, adding in a cruel tone that he would take her sister and that she would enjoy watching it. He laughed in a way that chilled Kuroka. She was terrified at the thought of anything happening to Kaneko, who was innocent. Kuroka pleaded with him to stop. The master struck her again, wounding her, and when another companion pushed him, he reacted with sudden fury. He accused them of forgetting he had saved them and then drew his sword. In a rapid, violent burst, he struck the companions who had tried to stop him, and they fell under his assault. Kuroka watched in horror as they were overwhelmed and collapsed. She panicked and decided she had to get Kaneko out of there. Kuroka fled up the stairs toward Kaneko's room. Before entering, a voice behind her froze her in place and tightened her chest. Someone was drawing near. Fear mounted, and she realized she had only one option. She had recovered some strength after resting that day and was no longer as weak as she had been against the monster's body. She vowed not to let the deaths of her companions be in vain. She sealed Kaneko's room with a barrier keyed to her power so the parasite controlling the master could not pass through. She made sure the seal could not be broken by the master's diminished energy. Kuroka felt the weight of what she had to do and stepped forward to face the corrupted being that had once saved them. Kuroka thought she needed to eliminate him quickly so she would not tire later. Knowing she would become a renegade demon, She expected they would come for her to finish the job. She planned to camouflage herself and disappear with the last of her power. The attacker lunged with his sword. Kuroka responded with a barrier and allowed her body to assume its final senjutsu form, a state that let her wield both negative and positive energy. He staggered back, and Kuroka closed the distance at top speed, striking him solidly and forcing him to cough and stumble. To her shock, the signs of injury matched the master's blood. Without hesitation, she pulled back slightly and unleashed bursts of energy. He parried automatically with his sword, mirroring the exact movements the master had used, which filled Kuroka with rage. Kuroka begged him to stop and demanded the master's body back, her voice breaking. The man only laughed, cold and emotionless. The thought of having to kill the one who had saved her life made her weep, but she pushed the pain aside. Her resolve was to avenge her fallen comrades and to never allow Chiron to be harmed. Kuroka froze when a whisper reached her. It was the master's voice. She could hardly believe it. The master apologized, and hearing him made Kuroka break down. She pleaded that it was not his fault and begged forgiveness for failing to protect him. The master gently told her not to cry, urged her to go on and kill the monster, thanked her, and assured her that someone would take care of her and that things would be all right for her sister. He explained that he had only this final fragment of energy to give her those words. He reminded her that she was not alone, and then his voice faded. Kuroka wiped her tears and concentrated all her power into the palm of her hand. She could see that he, too, was gathering every ounce of strength into his sword. This could only end one way, by defeating the monster that had killed them all. At top speed, Kuroka launched her final attack. He met her in the center, and their energies collided in a furious clash. Kuroka managed to land a decisive blow, exhausted and trembling, relieved at the apparent victory. The sword, however, continued to channel destructive force, and the area around them began to erupt with uncontrolled energy. Cursing the unending violence, Kuroka broke the seal on the room and hurried inside to find Chiron awake and ready to. Now the painful part was inevitable. She would have to lie. Chiron looked at the master's body and, with innocent sorrow, asked why it was covered in blood. She was beginning to understand what had happened, and seeing her like that made Kuroka's heart ache. Swallowing hard, Kuroka decided on a harsh lie to shield her sister from the truth and to close the wound that had opened in both their lives. She told Chiron coldly that she could not be of help, that if Chiron wanted to survive she should run away and not return. The words shattered Kuroka from the inside. She turned away, crying, and fled the place with her heart in pieces, hoping, in a fragile whisper to herself, that Chiron would survive. The memory ended. Later, Kuroka recounted what had happened, her voice trembling. Chiron listened, horrified, but quickly realized that none of it had been her sister's fault. She embraced Kuroka, and the two of them cried together for several minutes. An angel observed from nearby and remarked that the sisters had reconciled. Security prepared to leave for the occult research club and suggested that Kaneko should attend too. He handed Kuroka a small device that looked like a switch. He explained that it functioned like a television simulator and would transmit the events of his upcoming fight against a phoenix, so she would not worry and would stay informed. Kuroka accepted the device and nodded as he departed with the younger Nikomata. 1 hour later, in the occult research club, Issei waited, growing bored as he anticipated Graphia's arrival. A magic circle began to glow in the center of the room, signaling that the battle was about to start. Graphia stepped out and summoned Issei and Irina to stand in the circle. The others wished them luck, and Issei turned to Irina, who appeared nervous. Issei reassured Irina with a determined look and vowed that he would never let that foolish opponent harm her. Irina returned his smile, which filled him with confidence that he would win. After a brief pause, they were transported to the arena. Issei recognized it as a pocket dimension, a common format in raiding games, as Gabriel had explained. He understood this was a test to measure how strong a human and a brunette human could be against a phoenix. The demons were proving both annoying and absurd. Graphia Lucifuge, a platinum-haired maid of the Gremory household, introduced herself as the referee for the raiding game and explained the rules. She said she would keep watch in the name of the Demon King Surzex Lucifer. By agreement between Lady Rias and Lord Riser, the match would take place at Kuo Academy. Riser Phoenix's base would be the student council room in the new building, and Issei Hyodo's base would be the occult research club room in the old school building. Grafia stated that pawn promotion would not be allowed because Issei's team consisted of only 2 members, and each team would receive 1 vial of Phoenix Tears. With that, Grafia declared the raiding game begun. Issei thought this was his moment and resolved not to waste it. As soon as Grafia finished speaking, he looked at Irina. She nodded, opened a map, and together they worked out a plan. Issei told Irina that she should set traps in the forest, raise an illusion barrier over their base, and use Excalibur to whip up a whirlwind in the gymnasium. He explained that the enemy would likely try to take the center, which would be the main point of their attack. Issei said he would go straight to the enemy base and reminded Irina that they had trained together for 2 years, asking her to show him she was strong. Irina smiled and set off to carry out the plan while Issei waited a moment, reminding himself not to rush his attack. He rose from the Occult Research Club sofa and walked steadily toward the opposing base, finding the atmosphere oddly calm despite the boredom. Irina had just heard Issei's instructions and felt that their 2 years of training had to mean something. She did not want to be a burden to the church or a disappointment to Gabriel. She wanted to be strong and would prove it now. She moved quickly to check on the pawns who had apparently fallen into the trap she had set in the forest, thinking them naive for taking such a simple bait. One of the pawns mocked the barrier and declared that it would not defeat them. The others laughed. Irina decided to surprise them. She stepped out, startling them, and unleashed Excalibur in a form that produced razor-sharp needles. Her practice strikes caused a chill among the pawns as she attacked with rapid precision. Minutes later, a report came through. 5 pawns and 1 of Riser's bishops were withdrawing. Irina noted that Issei's plan had worked and that the whirlwind in the gymnasium had gone well. She had practiced that technique many times with him and still felt tired afterward. There was no time to complain, so she ran toward the enemy base to rendezvous with Issei. As she ran, a sense of danger made her summon Mimic, which manifested as a sword to protect her from a knight among the opposing forces. Irina told herself she would be delayed but pressed on. She also noticed other members of the enemy group assembling and braced for what would likely be more exhausting encounters. The knight, quick and confident, proposed a duel of swords, expressing that it would be an honor to face one of Excalibur's fragments. Irina accepted the challenge with a grin, adopting a guard with her sword still in its normal form and focusing on her opponent's movements. A blonde girl with twin tails watched and complained internally that Irina thought only of swords, even when a seemingly capable opponent appeared. Irina glanced over and realized the girl must be affiliated with the Phoenix side, bearing a strong resemblance to Riser Phoenix. The blonde introduced herself as Ravel Phoenix, Razor Phoenix's younger sister. Ravel explained that she did not fight and acted more like a cheerleader who stayed to protect her brother, having been trained by their mother. She laughed lightly at Irina's obvious focus on swordplay and left the duel to proceed. Irina changed tactics, swapping her sword for a whip tipped with a razor edge and launching it at the knight, who defended with skill. She took several steps back and then transformed the weapon into a spear crackling with holy lightning. The knight recoiled, attempting hesitant strikes that Irina easily anticipated. Her spear emitted sacred energy that tainted the knight's own attacks, slowly sapping the opponent's strength without gruesome harm. Satisfied, Irina shifted the spear into many needles, as she had done earlier, and adopted a serious expression to finish the encounter. The knight formed a magical shield that initially blocked Excalibur. Irina then fashioned a needled sword and summoned a cutting gale that shattered the shield. The knight's face registered extreme surprise, and Irina felt a thrill at seeing that look of realization, as if victory had already been sealed. The knight exclaimed in astonishment at how she could possess so many sacred gears, having assumed she only had Excalibur. Irina calmly clarified that they were not separate sacred gears. Her Excalibur was Excalibur Mimic. Razor could shape his weapon into whatever form he imagined and strike as he wished while wielding it, which allowed him to create many swords and other constructs with the same attribute. He unleashed his greatest attack, Regal Loon Mimic, intending to make the others fall as well. He had practiced the technique with Gabriel, who had warned that this kind of assault appeared in many Excaliburs and was risky because it could drain all physical and magical capacity in a single blow. It was the most powerful method, a barrage of thousands of horizontal slashes forming a golden structure full of sacred power, which Razor avoided using to its full lethal extent because he had been forbidden to kill outright. He limited himself to severe strikes even though they exhausted him quickly. Grafia announced that 3 pawns, 2 knights, and 2 rooks of Razor had withdrawn. Razor noticed the blonde with pigtails still standing. She had judged the attack too dangerous and left the immediate area. He thought she was intelligent, unlike her brother. The attack had left him fatigued, so he climbed to the roof of the new building where Issei was engaged in combat, the sounds of blows guiding his steps and spurring him to move faster. He reassured himself that Issei need not worry because he had arrived. Issei had heard Grafia's earlier announcements that the battle was nearly over. From his vantage, he had watched Razor almost seem to enjoy taking Issei's powerful attacks, and he knew he would have to get serious to defeat this opponent. Razor regenerated constantly, and Phoenix tears were still in play. The sadistic smile that had been on Razor's face as he watched Issei wear down was infuriating. Though Issei knew his strength remained far greater, he had been giving the other man false hope to keep him focused. Irina arrived at Issei's side, earning a full smile from him because he was pleased with her performance in the fight. He also noticed the Queen of Razor approaching. She had been involved in the incident that had provoked Irina before, and her presence stirred a deep anger in Issei. A short memory surfaced. Razor had taunted Issei and had summoned his queen to provoke them. The display had been intended to insult and humiliate, which had enraged both Issei and Irina. Drag had spoken to Issei mentally, noting that dragons were jealous of their partners and that it was natural for him to resent the show of arrogance. The thought fed Issei's resolve. He had warned the provocateur that he would erase that smug expression from his face and show how fearsome the celestial dragons could be. Back in the present, Irina moved off to face Razor's queen, and Issei gave her the phoenix tears because she had grown tired. He knew from years of training with Excalibur mimic techniques that, despite her high output of power, Irina had limits when channeling such concentrated energy, so the aid would help her continue. Grateful for her help earlier, Issei prepared to finish the battle himself and increased his power while activating his senjutsu. Issei told Razor that it was time to fight seriously and moved with a speed Razor struggled to match. He created a barrier and launched spiritual energy-infused strikes that landed heavily, staggering Razor. Issei produced several sword illusions to pressure him, and Razor responded by hurling a large fireball. Issei had a barrier that easily halted the attack, which only heightened Razor's anger. Razor arrogantly declared his victory was assured, raising his arms, but Issei closed in quickly and leaned in to ask if he truly believed that. Issei then used illusions to make it seem he was attacking from one angle while remaining at Razor's side. He distracted Razor with a volley of arrows that the other covered with magical fire, but the diversion allowed Issei to strike with his maximum sacred energy. He targeted Razor's core, aiming to disrupt the opponent's consciousness and prevent regeneration from taking effect. The impact sent a powerful shock through the area. Razor staggered, convulsed briefly, and then collapsed, rendered unconscious. The Queen of Razor was near defeat. Irina was in good condition, and the fight had ended. Grafia announced that Razor was unconscious and that victory belonged to Hayate Issei's team. Issei smiled at the news and felt Irina happily cling to him. He stroked her head gently and, together, they went back to the Occult Research Club room to celebrate. 5 minutes after their brief celebration, a magic circle appeared in the club room and a being materialized one Issei recognized from his readings. Demon King Surzex Lucifer approached Issei and smiled. Surzex congratulated Issei, saying that he had been strong and that his battle against Razor Phoenix had been impressive. He remarked that Issei's control of the Excalibur fragment was almost perfect and introduced himself as the current Demon King with a light laugh. Everyone watched as Surzex formed a magic circle. Razor Phoenix erupted in rage and declared that he would kill Issei to claim victory. Razor stepped toward him, but the Demon King touched Razor's shoulder and pushed him back. Razor looked ashamed and furious, raising his power. Surzex matched him, making Razor's display of strength seem weak by comparison. Surzex then spoke seriously. He noted that a human who controlled the sage arts was facing a descendant of the Phoenix family and offered Issei anything within his power if he accepted the wager. He also asked Razor never to act like that again. Issei replied that he wanted the marriage of Rias Gremory cancelled and that the demons should stop watching him under any circumstances. He did not explain why, but he insisted that Surzex would learn the reasons in time. Surzex accepted the request with visible pleasure. He called on the platinum-haired maid, Graphia, who appeared and formally created a pocket dimension for the duel. Inside the pocket dimension, Issei prepared to face Razor properly. Drake warned that Issei should use his power, otherwise he might have to rely partially on his angelic energy, since his spiritual energy was not yet comparable to some others and Razor's Phoenix power was stronger than before. Issei agreed, called forth the booster gear, and surprised Razor with the sudden change. Razor lost control, screaming that Issei was the security eye and attacking with ferocity. Drake initiated a boost and Issei felt his power surge. Issei avoided Razor's first strike, and Razor became more enraged, his flames growing far more intense and dangerous. Issei knew he had to end the fight quickly. Issei fired a massive dragon shoot. Razor attempted to shield himself and escape by flying, but the attack pursued and struck him directly. The impact created a tremendous shockwave that shook the arena and raised a cloud of dust. When the dust settled, Razor lay badly damaged, several of his wings destroyed and unable to recover immediately. Issei prepared a far more powerful dragon shoot as a finishing move. Razor gathered a dark, fiery energy as a final stand. Issei and Drake increased their power together, channeling everything they had into one decisive attack. Their two spheres of energy collided in a blinding explosion of light. Issei shielded his face until the glare subsided. When Issei looked forward, he saw Razor collapsed and motionless from the intensity of the clash. Issei considered delivering a final blow, but a young blonde girl with pigtails intervened, stepping between them and defending her brother. She pleaded tearfully that Issei stop and would not allow him to hurt her brother. Issei instantly calmed at the sight of her tears. He had never liked seeing a woman cry. He softened and offered the girl a defiant, reassuring smile, telling her that she could challenge him whenever she wished and that he would always be ready to confront anyone who stood in his way. The girl was surprised by his reaction. As the scene settled, Issei slipped and began to fall through the space of the pocket dimension. He was caught by Rias and her entourage, and Irina watched him with wet eyes and a tired smile. Irina leaned in and gently kissed his cheek. Issei flushed and was embarrassed, but he noticed the Demon King nearby. Surzex observed Issei and commented on Razor's hatred toward him, noting that Issei was not an ordinary human. He controlled the sage arts, wielded the booster gear, and had become the new true Dragon King. Surzex found Issei intriguing. The group celebrated together. Issei reflected that life continued to bring unexpected challenges and opportunities. He felt that the decision he had made would help him distance himself from others when necessary, and perhaps that distance would be for the best. Gabriel, a seraphim archangel, stood on the highest surface of heaven with her Joker and the other seraphim, discussing plans calmly while the others listened. Gabriel asked if anyone had an opinion about what to do for Christmas, noting that there was only one day left and nothing had been done yet. Her tone of annoyance carried weight. Those present remembered only once seeing her angry, and they knew she could rival divine power. The Joker suggested building a huge snow-covered tree layered like a mountain and decorating the rest with lights and fireworks. Gabriel's Joker watched his mistress calmly as she nodded firmly. Gabriel proposed celebrating by inviting all the angels, explaining that most would attend because they were interested in human customs and Christmas was observed across many factions. She then turned to Dulio and asked if he would help organize the celebration or if he preferred to visit somewhere. She reminded him that he had already seen all the countries in the human world and suggested that he could use the time to get to know Issei better, since he had wanted to meet him. Dulio affirmed his willingness, and Gabriel declared that they would handle the preparations and assist in every way they could. Gabriel and Dulio smiled and shook hands, sealing the agreement. The archangel looked at the others, who had paid little attention and watched with arrogance and boredom. Gabriel cleared her throat slightly to draw their attention. The room quieted and they answered briefly. Uriel expressed indifference, saying the decorations did not matter to him, and the others silently agreed. Gabriel grew cold for a moment before turning away and ignoring them, which left them incredulous but resigned. Gabriel then assigned teams. She told Issei that he would go with Dulio and that she would go with Miguel. She reminded them that time was short and urged them to hurry and give their best effort. Issei and Dulio smiled and agreed, and their shared grin brought a small laugh from Miguel. He looked at his sister and her joker with amusement, imagining their future together and smiling widely. The others merely sighed and left to begin their tasks. Issei's perspective. They arrived at the surface where the building for the celebration and the giant tree would be constructed. Gabriel's team had arranged for builders, and Issei and Dulio waited while the builders worked, told it would take about 15 minutes. During that time, Dulio talked about his travels and Issei shared his experiences. Issei liked Dulio and was surprised to learn that he had visited more than 15 countries in 6 days. Issei imagined Dulio had barely stopped in each place. Dulio asked about Issei's relationship with Gabriel, saying that it seemed no one had ever seen her as happy near anyone the way she was with him. Issei felt surprised and a little embarrassed by the question. He explained that he was Gabriel's joker, that she had saved him 2 years earlier from a fallen angel who had attacked him, and that he had sworn loyalty to her ever since. Living with Gabriel for 2 years had turned their bond into a kind of friendship as well, and Issei believed that was why Gabriel treated him the way she did. Dulio nodded, and before he could reply one of the builders informed them the construction was finished. They moved to decorate, determined not to disappoint Gabriel. 1 day later. By midday both seraphim looked satisfied at the completed construction. They admired the effort of the 2 jokers and felt very happy with the result. Gabriel and Miguel went to find the 2, who were resting and looked exhausted. Not wanting to disturb them, the archangels continued decorating the rest of heaven, leaving the jokers to sleep. Irina arrived back from her mission and knelt before Miguel, confirming she had completed it. She smiled at both Gabriel and Miguel. Miguel asked her not to be so formal and said her purity reminded him of their father, which reassured him. He promised to give her a reward later and asked that she show it to the others. Irina set aside her formality and embraced Miguel, surprising him. Gabriel laughed at the sight, and the 3 of them shared a warm moment. A few hours later, Issei and Dulio woke up sore from the hard work of decorating, but pleased that everything had turned out as they had hoped. They noticed that the seraphim were not where they expected and went to look for them. They found Irina hugging Miguel and laughing together. Issei felt puzzled. He had thought Irina would spend Christmas with her family and hesitated, unsure what to say. Dulio asked what they were whispering about and greeted Miguel, Gabriel, and Irina. The 3 stopped laughing, smiled back, and returned the greeting. Dulio explained that Irina had gotten excited and hugged Miguel because he had just finished a mission that was important to both of them. Gabriel then asked how everyone had slept that morning. Gabriel nodded at the reply and Irina followed. Both of them bowed politely. Issei watched the blonde woman with a puzzled expression because the tone she had used when mentioning him sounded unusual, almost worried. He stepped a little closer to ask what was wrong. Gabriel noticed Issei's concern and asked what the matter was. Issei, confused by Irina's behavior, found her looking away and answering awkwardly. He recalled a dream he had while sleeping and blushed at the thought that she might have heard him. Irina admitted that while he was asleep she had mentioned him and that he had been dreaming. She asked what he had been dreaming about, stumbling over her words. Issei became deeply embarrassed, bowed, and apologized loudly, asking Gabriel to punish him for his foolishness. The others laughed at the awkward scene. Irina wiped her brow, refused to punish him, and told him to stand up and help finish decorating the tree and the building for the fast-approaching Christmas, since they only had a few hours left. They set to work decorating. None of them noticed that Gabriel's joker was missing. Issei and Dulio were finishing up when Issei suddenly felt a chill run through him. A shimmering breach opened nearby, and he moved toward it, instinctively taking up a battle stance to see what might emerge. Before he could fully turn, a voice behind him apologized and asked him to come along for a moment. A figure moved silently, placed a hand over his mouth to keep him quiet, and guided him through the breach. When he stepped through, he found himself surrounded by countless lights, like a starry expanse. The sight was breathtaking. Someone removed the hand from his mouth, and when he turned to see who had brought him there, he froze. A girl stood before him in a gothic Lolita outfit, with hair as dark as the space around them and eyes that seemed empty and shadowed. Issei felt a shiver of fear and took a cautious step back, asking who she was and what she wanted. The girl explained that she had no ordinary name but was known as Ophis, also called the Ouroboros dragon or the infinite dragon. She greeted him and told him she had been watching him since the times when people had tried to kill him. She said she wanted to ask him some questions and had chosen this moment precisely because she had been observing him. Ophis went on to say that she was interested in his power and believed that if they fought together they might be able to defeat Great Red, a dragon stronger than she was who had taken her home the very place where they now stood. Issei listened, perplexed. He told Ophis that he did not understand what power she meant. He admitted that before being taken by Gabriel he had never noticed anything unusual about himself, though he sometimes had memories of a life he could not place, memories that felt like a life he had lived but that did not match anything he remembered. He asked if she knew who he truly was, explaining that these memories confused him. Ophis reacted with surprise, then grew serious. She pointed to the ground beneath them, which was a deep red that stretched outward, and Issei suddenly realized where he was. Ophis clarified that they had been speaking atop Great Red the whole time. She asked him to sit and said that both she and Great Red wanted to tell him something important, asking him to keep it secret until they told him he could share it. After Issei calmed and sat down, Ophis told him that his memories had been erased some time ago. For some reason she explained that he had used his powers until he lost his mind and was sent 30 years into the past. She described how his life had been erased automatically and how he now believed himself to be nobody because those memories tormented him every day. She said she knew all this because she had watched him during that time, and that the power he used had affected her and the strongest who tried to protect themselves from it. She added that, unfortunately, everyone else's memories had ceased, but she had managed to recreate an apple that restored all her previous memories. She could not explain why he alone had suffered those memories and why his power had suddenly sealed. She also said that no one remembered him and that everyone seemed to have forgotten he had ever existed. She spoke with a somewhat sad look, which confused him. He did not understand what he had been before. Issei asked what he had been before, and she looked at him seriously. She began to answer but stopped without finishing. A few minutes later in heaven, with about 20 minutes until December 25th, everyone had finished their tasks and were searching for Issei everywhere. No one could find him, and Gabriel grew increasingly anxious to the point of freezing in place. Michael worried slightly about his sister and hoped Issei would appear soon to help her feel better. Hours passed and Issei had still not returned. In truth, he was with Ophis, something no one knew. Everyone else assumed he had simply disappeared. Michael had called several guards to patrol all of heaven, convinced someone had abducted the angel, but the guards reported that there was no suspicious presence. Several minutes later, Issei was talking with Ophis and Draig's spirit. Issei asked Ophis if she truly did not have a name. Draig watched in quiet surprise, slowly understanding the power that was troubling Issei and recognizing fragments of memories that Issei himself did not remember. The holder of Draig took time to process everything and remained in shock when Ophis revealed aspects of her true identity. Both agreed to keep certain answers secret for the moment. Ophis did not reveal everything. She said she remembered parts of her life before the catastrophe caused by Draig's previous wielder and that she had retained only the last memories of her past life. Issei and the others would need to continue searching for answers about the mysterious IsseixHarem. Ophis explained that she had no true name and had always been called Ophis. She also mentioned that she sometimes dressed in a masculine way and had been mistaken for the other gender. Issei suggested the name Yukino. He admitted he was not very original and hesitated, nervous about how she might react. Ophis accepted the name warmly. She said she liked Yukino and wished him a Merry Christmas, which caused a big smile to appear on Issei's face. He nodded and returned the greeting. He then prepared to leave and parted ways with the Crimson Dragon and the newly named Yukino with a brief farewell. He created a rift and returned to heaven. Issei found Gabriel in Michael's arms with a single tear falling. Gabriel embraced him when she saw him and responded to the hug. Gabriel called out to Issei, sounding a little upset and tearful. Issei restrained himself from laughing at her expression, and others nearby stifled their smiles as well. Gabriel's mood darkened briefly, making everyone tense, and Issei began to stammer in response. Issei explained that he had been downstairs talking with Uriel and that Uriel had left. Gabriel looked at him suspiciously for a moment but then smiled, and they went to finish the last decorations. Everyone hurried to celebrate, only minutes remained. All the angels gathered at the place where the fireworks were being prepared. When the Archangel of Heaven addressed the assembly, more than 300 angels listened and cheered at his words. The Archangel told them that they were celebrating Christmas once again, that the Lord was pleased with what they had done that year, and that he hoped they would continue in the same spirit. He invited them to enjoy the celebration and the fireworks. Those assigned to the fireworks took their positions. Issei stood with Gabriel at his side and a brunette next to them, all smiling as they awaited the display. Some angels felt a little jealous of the cheerful scene, but everyone focused on the celebration. Dulio stood beside the Archangel, watching the trio and enjoying the moment with a mild smile. The seraphim commented that the day reflected the brightness of heaven and celebrated the occasion. Demons, fallen angels, and even humans gathered below waited for that precise moment when everything would change. The countdown began from 3, then 2, then 1. At the final signal, everyone shouted Merry Christmas, and the fireworks burst into the sky as the celebration began. They watched everyone celebrating and embracing as fireworks painted the sky and reflected light everywhere. Through a dimensional rift, 2 dragons also celebrated Christmas, watching the same fireworks. Smiles and embraces spread among the others as they enjoyed the moment together. Draig asked with a worried tone what had happened, and Issei sighed, weary from the situation he was in. Issei explained that he had been trying to remember something from his former life and thinking about what Yukino had told him a year earlier. Draig reassured him that, since Issei had been given a chance to return 30 years earlier with a new life, he would not succumb to the curse of his power and could learn to control it. Draig also urged him to tell Kuroka, because she had been the most worried about his condition. Issei smiled and felt a little guilty at how much the others had worried on his account. Issei thanked Draig and said he would go speak to Kuroka and explain everything. He went to the kitchen, where Kuroka was surprised to see him. He sat across from her, and she nodded for him to speak. Issei apologized for being down all day, admitting he knew he had worried her and that he was sorry. Her sadness startled him, and he promised to tell her everything in detail, explaining that she was the only one he could trust so deeply in that moment. Kuroka looked surprised and then gave a small, encouraging smile. Issei began to tell what had happened. About a year earlier on Christmas, the dragon Ouroboros Ophis had taken Issei to her home to question him. She had explained what he truly was, and Kuroka listened intently, nodding solemnly when Ophis's name was mentioned. 1 year before, on December 24th, Ophis had told Issei that he was a celestial. She had described the celestial as the name she gave to his power, a kind of perfectly balanced force or an almost limitless reserve of spiritual energy combined with the essence of a celestial dragon. Ophis explained that he had once had Draig as well, and that he had been a reincarnated demon who had been killed and had been with Rias Gremry. He had been a hero of the underworld. His balanced spiritual energy had made him a different kind of supernatural being, not ordinary at all. Someone had entrusted him with that power, which marked him as special. Ophis continued that he had not always been the strongest. He had constantly faced new enemies who tried to kill him, and he always rose to fight them and defeat them however he could. During a pivotal battle, the person who had been reborn as Issei was struck down in a confrontation where he faced 2 choices: save Asia Argento or save Rias Gremry. He had tried to save both, choosing to help Asia first because she was the group's healer. He had not expected to confront the Emperor, the highest-ranking demon. When he went to rescue Asia, he could only watch in horror as she was struck and called his name. By the time he reached her, she was gone. The scene was described without graphic detail, portrayed instead as a sudden, devastating loss that shattered him. Afterward, Issei had not heeded Drake's pleas to calm down. He had let the darker aspects of his nature surge, becoming overwhelmingly powerful and erupting in a furious onslaught. In that juggernaut drive state he had defeated his enemies, but his balance of spiritual energy had been broken and his power became unstable. That instability caused a distortion in space and time that sent everyone into the past. They had survived, but they had lost their previous memories. Ophis had told him this with a sad expression, and Issei had been left shocked and with a hollow ache as he imagined the suffering his past self must have endured. Issei hugged Ophis then, promising he would never allow that to happen again and that he would protect the people he cared about. He vowed to grow stronger so that if those threats returned he could prevent the same tragedies. Ophis accepted his resolve and offered a little more confidence. After a moment, they wiped their faces and smiled at each other. Issei asked what kind of supernatural being he actually was. Ophis admitted she did not know for certain. She explained that he could not yet assume his true form because he did not possess sufficient positive energy. He only had enough negative energy to manage his power for now. A brief pause bridged the present to the uncertainty of what he might become when his energy changed. After the conversation, she told him he had to return. She accompanied him to teach him a few things and then left through a rift, naming herself before saying proper farewells to the Great Red and to the young Yukino. Back to the present. POV Kuroka. What Issei had just told her left Kuroka speechless. She imagined the pain he must have endured and, unable to hold back, rushed to him. She shed a few tears, apologized, and said she finally understood everything he had suffered. She also realized he was the being she had seen during her first training. She asked his forgiveness for disappointing him that day. After the long talk and brief talks with the others, though he had not told them the whole truth yet, Issei found himself training with Kuroka. He wanted to win once and for all and show he had learned what he needed so others would not worry. Issei asked Kuroka to fight him seriously. She was surprised but agreed with a smile, gathering spiritual power and waiting for his move. He concentrated spiritual energy in his left hand and sacred energy in his right, borrowing a trace of Drake's power as well. He combined them into a crimson orb with white edges, drawing it into himself even as a familiar mental voice warned him not to lose control. Drake warned him mentally that this could be dangerous. Issei responded in his thoughts that he had to take the chance if he was given another life. He did not know who he had been 30 years ago in another time, only that he needed to conquer his fears and build a new life. He called on Drake to join him, insisting they show the world their strength. The dragon fell silent for a moment, then accepted, and Issei felt calm confidence as the inherited power settled through him. Drake promised to be with him to the end, and Issei's surge of power stirred a wind that briefly unsettled Kuroka. She smiled wider, focused more of her own senjutsu into her hands, and hurled it toward him. Issei readied his booster gear, which shifted to a lava red with crimson edges while keeping a green core. He formed a sphere of white energy and launched it with his bracelet as a dragon shoot. Issei moved in to press the advantage. Kuroka formed a defensive barrier, but his strike pierced it and connected with his left fist full of energy, hitting her leg and then driving her away with a kick to the neck. The impact sent her into a crack in the training room wall. Kuroka, a Nikomata, had been taken off guard by the speed and balance of Issei's power. She could barely register the situation before she was driven into the wall. She pushed herself up with a groan, conjured several spears, and entered her maximum senjutsu state, throwing herself at the celestial. Issei blocked the assault with crossed arms and a spiritual shield, surprised by her sudden power increase. He countered with a barrage of dragon shoots and light spears, forcing her back and cornering her. Kuroka admitted she had not wanted to use that form, but if she wanted to win she had to. She channeled heavy energy into her arms and adapted to the strain. A blinding flash filled the room. When it subsided she stood in her enhanced state, her form and energy altered and glowing faintly. She declared this to be the maximum the Nekasha could use and remarked that Kaneko would become the strongest of them all, then attacked with renewed ferocity. Each of her blows carried so much pure energy that Issei's spiritual reserves were drained with every hit. Issei searched for a way to turn the tide but could not find one. After several attempts and blocks, a strike from Kuroka landed on his torso and threw him back into the wall. He hit the floor hard, winded and injured, and struggled to stand while Kuroka watched, believing she had won the bout. A voice entered Issei's thoughts, urging him to use his full potential. He felt confused and sought the speaker, asking who it was and what potential meant. The voice only sighed and told him he would understand in time. It told him to concentrate his dragon, spiritual and angelic power, to keep his usual self-confidence, and to let his instincts guide him for now. A gentle voice told Issei not to be sad and not to give up against anything that appeared in his life, and to always stay true to himself. He nodded with a smile. What the voice said felt true. He shook off his thoughts and tried to follow its guidance, listening to his instincts. Little by little he felt a power rising inside him that seemed to consume him, yet did not hurt him. It glowed purple and pure white. For a few moments he was nearly blinded by a brilliant light and squeezed his eyes shut as tightly as he could. When he opened them again, everything looked as it had before, but Kuroka appeared completely shocked, which confused him because he expected some visible change in his body. Nothing obvious had moved. Kuroka reacted with surprise and nervousness and asked if Issei was a yokai. He was puzzled and moved closer to ask what had changed, since he noticed nothing different in his body or any particular new power. Kuroka told him to look behind him and up. He obeyed and discovered something he had never expected. A white tail, a little long, protruding from the lower part of his back and swaying slowly from side to side. He looked up and found white cat ears. He also realized his hearing had sharpened considerably. He could even make out voices outside the room. He was surprised and tried to understand the situation. He stepped away from Kuroka and summoned his booster gear, which remained intact with the same color as before. He tested whether his senjutsu had improved by releasing a burst of spiritual energy that formed a small, very pure star. He smiled to himself. He had finally awakened his yokai form. His form resembled Kuroka's, so it seemed likely he was a Nekasha. Issei explained that this appeared to be his yokai form and that his instincts urged them to continue the battle. Kuroka, still recovering from the shock of discovering he was of her kind, eventually set aside her confusion and agreed. Using all the power he had in that moment, Issei threw one of the stars he had created at her. Kuroka acted a shield, but the star still struck her. Seizing the opportunity, Issei ran to her back and delivered a kick. His body thrummed with pure power. The strike should have overwhelmed her, but because she also had a large reservoir of power, he simply expended most of his own energy and left her knocked out for the time being. He approached where she had fallen and saw that she had fallen asleep. He felt a quiet satisfaction at having prevailed and at the mysterious voice that had spoken to him, the identity of which he planned to investigate later. He lifted Kuroka and carried her to his room, placing her on his bed so she could rest. He himself was exhausted from using so much power and decided he needed to rest as well. He smiled weakly to himself, thinking he had won in the end, and climbed the stairs to the kitchen and then back to his room. He noticed he was still in his yokai form and that it did not seem to disappear. He resolved to find a way to hide it for now, since he only wanted certain people to know. Drake's voice laughed through the booster gear, commenting that he had never expected him to be a Nekasha and that this made things more interesting. Issei felt grateful. Without that guidance he might have lost. The next day at the Hyudu residence, Kuroka's exclamation about him being a Nekasha echoed through the house. Issei shushed her and motioned for her to keep quiet at that hour. Kuroka admitted that she had been surprised and confessed that her group typically did not accept partners of that species, but with him it felt different. She asked Issei to promise he would stay by her side. Agreed, declaring that no matter his form, he would not abandon her and would protect her. Drake's amused chuckle drifted in his mind, increasing his nervousness. Kuroka said she wanted to be by his side and only look at him, and she leaned close to him, which made him even more nervous. He tried to smile and wondered how he would handle the situation. At that moment, Irina arrived at the door. Issei quickly concealed his ears and tail. Kuroka had recently taught him an easy method to hide his Nekashu aura so others would not discover his true nature. Irina burst in, sounding urgent and cold, insisting they had to leave for school immediately. Her aura made Issei uneasy. Issei sighed and made his way to the occult research clubroom. Upon entering quietly, he sensed several sacred energy swords that felt like Excaliburs. He recognized Irina's energy immediately and detected another exorcist's energy he did not know. It was likely Zenobia. Irina turned and, with some surprise, acknowledged his presence. The high command of the church had given him a mission with Zenobia, and he had come to speak with the demons. Zenobia introduced her companion to him, a blue-haired girl who, it seemed, bore a fragment of Excalibur. The girl turned, offered a cold, formal handshake, and regarded him with an impassive gaze. He returned the same look. Zenobia explained that she and Rias Gremory were bearers of Excalibur and that the church leaders had ordered them to recover the Excalibur fragments stolen by the fallen angels. One of Grigori's cadres had been responsible for the theft. Zenobia made it clear that they did not want any demon to interfere or attempt to make contact with the fragments. Rias reacted with outrage, insisting that the idea the church believed demons were cooperating with the fallen angels was absurd. She declared that, as a sister to one of the Mao, neither she nor the demons would ever conspire with fallen angels. Zenobia smiled to the side, appearing satisfied, and sat back while Rias gradually calmed. That was exactly what Zenobia wanted to hear. With that, Zenobia rose and left the room, carrying the Excalibur fragment. Before leaving, Zenobia addressed Asia. Asia grew visibly nervous at being so close to Zenobia, which made him uneasy because he knew Asia's past and the scars she bore from it. Zenobia asked Asia if she was the Holy Maiden Witch and whether she still believed in the Father. The mention of that title sent a chill through Asia. He felt pity for her and anger at Zenobia's tone. Asia answered that she still believed in God because she felt everything she was had been given by him and that she still prayed, even though she was now a demon. Zenobia then drew her blade and pointed it at Asia. He tensed, ready to act the moment Zenobia made a move. Zenobia offered to help Asia, but he moved faster, grabbing Zenobia's arm and stepping between them. He stared at Zenobia seriously and warned her of the danger of messing with any of them at that moment. Zenobia responded arrogantly, asking what he thought he was doing and whether he wanted to fight. Kiba arrived then, his expression full of hatred toward the sword and its bearer. Watching how they spoke to Rias, he noticed Kiba's hatred toward the blades growing stronger. Kiba declared that he would fight Zenobia too. Zenobia turned to him, puzzled, and asked his name. Kiba replied calmly that he could be called his senior. He stepped forward and stood at his side. The narrator released Zenobia's arm and met her gaze. Rias approached and asked Aquino to create a pocket dimension for the duel. Zenobia relaxed and smiled slightly. Rias suggested treating the fight as something outside the church's jurisdiction, a private contest that no one would ever know about. They moved outside the Occult Research Club building to begin the duel. Kiba stood beside him, grinning with a manic edge as he gripped a sword. He laughed in a cold, low way at having found the blade that had once cost him dearly. Kiba summoned multiple swords and seized one, clashing steel against the fragment Zenobia held. The narrator breathed a small sigh. If Kiba stayed blinded by hatred, he would lose too quickly. He blocked a spear with a shield he had just created and looked toward Irina, who watched the situation with amusement. He disliked that he had been matched against her, but this was life. He would have to fight her. He activated his booster gear and fired a volley of dragon shoot attacks. Irina deflected the shots and returned his smile, and he found himself smiling back. Her expression stayed with him. He told Irina that she should prepare because this time he would show no mercy. He launched another series of dragon shoot attacks. Irina transformed her Excalibur into different forms to parry and evade. He closed the distance and struck, and she met his blows with her forearms, blocking and countering. They engaged in close-quarters combat, trading strikes and defenses for several minutes. He reminded Irina that they had fought seriously many times before, but this time he wanted the duel to be public. He wondered if she was ready for a true, earnest battle. He asked, seeing her smile broadly and playfully, and when she nodded at what he had said, he decided to get a little more serious. He pushed himself because if he kept fighting like this he would get bored and would end up letting her win, letting them think he was weak. That had always bothered him, and Gabriel had taught him that a battle did not always mean fighting at full strength, but he did not care in that moment. He knew he might regret it later, but he did not have time to think about the future. He opened his wings and unleashed thousands of spears of light. The demons and even the other exorcist were surprised to see him. He let a small, sideways smile show as he watched Irina expend so much power that she became careless. He closed the distance with a burst of speed, struck her in a way that rendered her unconscious, and gently placed her in Zenobia's arms when he saw Kiba had been defeated. Rias apologized for the misunderstanding and then indicated that they had to leave, wishing hiya to Issei they would see him soon. Rias spoke to Kiba, who seemed to leave with them, and he took the chance to slip away to avoid questioning, distancing himself from the area with a beat of his wings. He allowed himself a nervous chuckle at the thought that he might have caused some trouble in the human world. He was completely alone. Darkness stretched around him, and he wondered why all he could see was more darkness coming toward him. He wished he knew where he was and why he had been so weak that he could not protect anyone. He asked himself if he deserved to be alone for all eternity. Flashback. He tried to remember where he was. The day before, he had fought Kuroka and then gone on to face Irina, revealing his wings in front of the Gremory entourage. The last thing he recalled was going home and sleeping, but this place bore no resemblance to home. He had been shouting into nothing for minutes, asking where he was. A voice spoke from all directions, confusing him because he could not tell where it came from. The voice explained that he was inside an alternate dimension and asked if he remembered it. It said that it had spoken to him at a critical moment during his battle with Kuroka and had brought him here to talk, and also to show him a future he had experienced and might still face if he was not careful. He told the voice to show itself. A humanoid figure that was first black and white took shape before him, then resolved into the form of a girl his age with white hair in twin tails. Her worn black outfit and pale skin contrasted with crimson eyes that had narrow pupils and a peculiar, unsettling smile. Her expression made him uneasy, and for a moment he felt intimidated and afraid. She did not, however, seem intent on attacking. She explained that she was a consciousness that had resided deep within him. She did not know exactly why she existed, but she believed her purpose was to help him, which made him her master. She had no name, and though she was part of his consciousness, she could take form and become her own, living alone in that darkness for many years. He asked what she wanted to show him. She closed her eyes, then opened them again. When he looked into them, he saw only emptiness and sorrow. They sat on nothing, as if on the air, and she grew serious as she explained why he had been brought to that place. She said that some years ago he had met someone from a past life who had told him things that made him doubt his power, and that his doubts had stirred her through his emotions. That awakening had allowed her to enter his thoughts, reaching the place where the celestial dragon resided. The dragon had tried to fight her, and because she had no desire to leave, she sealed that alternate dimension so that one day he could come and she could tell him about herself and about his true power. She admitted that her presence might still linger on the dragon. He understood then that Drake had sensed that unknown power before. She continued, telling him that she was an entity, a cat spirit and dragon who had created the void, the darkness, and served as a counterpart to a godlike force. She did not know how she had arrived in that place, but she knew she had to be with him. She also did not know how she had come to exist in this universe as his hidden power. She suspected she might be the last remnant of the strength he had possessed in a previous life, and perhaps the reason he had lost control then. The entity explained that the previous version of him had not even known she existed and had simply fallen into her darkness after being forced to use her power without asking. She had been compelled to act, creating a flash that ended that entire universe and brought everyone into this one. Because she had been too weak at the time, she could not restore the memories of all those people, especially his. She had rested and waited for everything to repeat, surprised that the story had changed so much and relieved that the dragon had preserved the memories in that apple, since that dragon had been the only hope for his memories. The entity told him that if he wanted to protect his loved ones and become strong, he had two options. The protagonist felt surprised and uneasy, because that entity had been the cause of losing everything he had longed for in his former life by awakening and unleashing his uncontrollable power. He asked what the two options were, looking at her seriously because he did not want to repeat past mistakes. He wanted to become stronger to protect others. He still felt useless and could not bear to see the people he cared about suffer. The entity smiled, rose, and walked beside him. She looked beautiful for an entity of his, and he still could not fully understand her nature, though he hoped they could cooperate. The entity explained that the first option was to form a contract with her. He would become her master, and she would train him to control the power she possessed so he could use it at full strength and possibly allow her to use her own power again. She described that her power was sensitivity and, above all, divine darkness, a force similar to light and demonic power. It was extremely dangerous because it could erase anything it touched. He felt fear at the thought of such power. The entity noticed his concern and he took a breath to calm himself before asking about the second option. The entity became serious and told him that the second option was that she would repeat the story countless times with only them aware. After thousands of years, she could emerge with her power fully realized and create a universe where he alone could live forever, but she would die upon joining him and he would remain alone for all eternity. He nodded, breathed, and then chose the first option. He decided to accept the contract. End of flashback. He found himself inside the very darkness itself, sorting through his feelings. The entity had told him he should review all his memories from his previous life, and when he did, the emotions, thoughts, and everything from that past returned to him. He spent a few minutes calming his racing mind and composing his feelings, because the life he remembered had been painfully difficult. After settling, he waited in the endless dark for the entity to return and tell him something. A few minutes later, the entity said that he had finally succeeded. He turned to see her smiling and clapping, and he faced her as she approached. He admitted that it had taken effort, but he had managed. He asked whether she had no name, since he did not know how to address her and thought that giving her a name might be appropriate. She nodded, curious about what he might choose. He thought for a moment and then brightened when he found a name he hoped she would like. He asked if she would like to be called Sakura, acknowledging it was not original and offering to think of others if she preferred. Before he could finish, she threw herself into his arms and hugged him, crying. He tried to console her, apologizing and promising to think of another name if necessary, and he asked her not to cry. She smiled through her tears and thanked him for the name, saying she liked Sakura. Her gratitude made him nervous because of how close she was. He asked whether she had said she could be a cat spirit or a dragon. She looked a little confused at first and then confirmed that she could take any form, but her original species was a celestial cat spirit. She added that he was of her species too and possibly the only other celestial being besides her, calling him Master Issei with a shy smile. The warmth of the moment made him increasingly flustered. A few minutes later, Sakura told him it was time for him to return. She looked down, reluctant to part, and he stepped closer, placing his hands on her shoulders and cupping her cheek to make her look at him and smile. He reassured Sakura that he would return soon even if he did not yet know how, and he asked why she could not come with him since she had said she could exist in a normal form without difficulty. She sighed and looked at him. He felt nervous and apologized as his hands still rested on her shoulders. Sakura said that she could come only if he fulfilled the contract first. He asked what he had to do to complete the contract, thinking it must have been made already. Sakura replied that he should kiss her hand, and that would bind the contract. She looked nervous and blushed. He also flushed, then took her hand and gently pressed his lips to it. The gesture was tender and sincere. She smiled, and that moment sealed their agreement. He stepped back a little and saw her hand flash. A strange symbol formed beneath their feet, like an arrow, with a heart and petals around it. Sakura bowed and said the contract was sealed. She pledged her service to Issei and then made the symbol vanish. Issei froze, nervous at what had just happened. He asked if she truly would serve him, and Sakura nodded with a smile that made him blush. He looked away so she would not notice. Fortunately, Their location offered enough privacy. Back in the human world, Draig's mental voice startled him awake, warning that someone was there. Issei sat up and found Sakura smiling in front of him. He sighed and felt amused by Draig's exaggerated reaction. He explained mentally to Draig that Sakura was the presence he had mentioned. They had formed a contract and now she would serve him. Draig responded with wide-eyed shock, and Issei laughed quietly before beginning to tell the red celestial dragon the whole story. Hours later, Irina watched silently, furious and unsettled by how Issei behaved with the pale girl at his side. She glared at Sakura and demanded that Issei explain who the girl was, pointing at her. Issei sighed and told Irina that Sakura was his servant. He had made the contract. Zenobia beside Irina sighed tiredly. Irina demanded to be made his servant as well and slammed the table in frustration, but Sakura calmly said it was impossible, only she could be his servant, because she already had the contract. Irina's anger flared and she tensed as if to draw Excalibur, but Zenobia shouted for her to calm down and managed to steady her. Though still angry, Irina crossed her arms and watched as demons approached the table. They had come because Issei had offered to help after finding the exorcists and the others when they were short on money and looking for work. Issei intended to ask for a favor. He wanted their help with the main mission, which was to take down the cadre and recover the fragments of Excalibur. Issei asked Kaneko to call Kiba and tell him about the plan, and Kaneko took out her phone to call the swordsman who had been upset with Zenobia earlier. Irina then teased Issei about what had happened with the Gremory family after recent events, making him nervous. Issei admitted he had not spoken with them yet and that Kaneko knew who he was. He joked that Irina had let herself be defeated too easily. Irina protested that she had only been tired. Some hours later, Kiba had arrived. They had convinced Saji to join them, and they discussed Sakura's effect on Zenobia and Irina, laughing at the memory of their expressions. Disguised as priests, they moved toward a church where fallen angels might be infiltrating. Issei sensed a presence nearby, and Kaneko responded with the same alert. Kaneko shouted that the threat was above, and the group stepped aside as a man fell down and landed with a horrible voice. He was clearly a man expelled from the church. They removed their hoods and took up defensive stances, though Sakura stood calmly without raising her guard. Perhaps the priest held no threat for her. Fried Selzen announced himself with a bitter, mocking tone, saying he had hoped to find priests to kill but instead found the same trash. He taunted them about the red-headed woman and made cruel promises about what fate awaited them. Issei recognized the voice. Fried was the exorcist expelled for becoming a murderer, once a master swordsman who had turned to darkness. Zenobia declared that, as a bearer of Excalibur, she intended to end Fried quickly and stepped forward with Kiba. Issei warned them about the sword's nature and began to speak, but before he could finish, Fried moved with astonishing speed. He closed the distance in a blur, clashing blades with both of them and striking Kiba before Kiba could read his moves. Fried boasted that this was the impressive Excalibur rapidly, a weapon that granted astonishing speed. The skirmish became a fast, intense exchange of blades and swift maneuvers, the kind of high-energy, stylized combat that left the onlookers scrambling to keep up. Fried laughed like a madman, and Issei was surprised to hear Sakura speak to him. Sakura observed that the speed was pathetic and noted that the sword could be faster than light in theory, but it did not exhibit any truly admirable speed, especially in the hands of someone who did not know how to use it and was not the chosen one to wield it. Her words irritated Fried enough that he moved faster. Fried challenged Sakura to stop the attack, moving with terrifying speed. Issei stepped in front of him and was quickly brushed aside. Fried's speed far exceeded his own, and Issei realized he could not protect everyone by himself. Issei froze in shock when he saw Sakura casually hold the sword with a single finger, tracking its movements without effort. Fried shouted incredulously at how a mere human could follow Excalibur's motions. Sakura used her finger to stop each incoming strike, and on one exchange she evaded and kicked Fried so hard he was flung into the church, which cracked under the impact. Issei stood stunned by her power. She was undeniably strong. Issei ordered Saji to stop Fried. Saji snapped out of his daze, nodded, and activated his sacred gear. Saji created a line of energy called absorption line that wrapped around Fried's leg and caused him to stumble, giving Zenobia and Kiba the chance to attack while he was momentarily restrained. Issei heard a soft groan and saw Sakura clutching her arm. He worried immediately and supported her, watching her smile in spite of the discomfort. Issei asked if she was hurt. Sakura apologized, explaining that she had used a lot of power in those seconds and, since she was not yet at full strength, it had been too much. She apologized for not being more useful to Issei. Before tears could fall from her eyes, Issei gently wiped them away and stroked her head with a reassuring smile. He told her not to worry and to rest for a bit. Sakura smiled, nodded, made a soft purr, and then dissolved into a fine powder that merged into Issei, leaving him with a quiet sense of warmth. At that moment, an old bearded man whom Issei recognized arrived behind Fried, the very man Kiba had been hunting for revenge. Balba Galilei surveyed the group and commented on the strange assembly: 2 Excalibur fragment bearers, a demon, a dragon wielder, and a human. He asked Fried what he intended to do. Fried, indignant, asked how to remove Saji's energy line. Balba told him to concentrate the energy of Excalibur and understand its power, then he could cut the line with ease. Fried focused and succeeded, snapping the line apart and causing Saji to be knocked back by the sudden force. Kiba moved toward Balba with his sword raised, furious and speaking about being the sole survivor of Balba's experiment to create holy swords years ago. Kiba vowed to kill Balba to avenge his fallen companions. Balba replied that he had indeed been expelled from the church for those experiments, and his words only fueled Kiba's rage. Fried then taunted the group, boasting that their weapons were nothing but toys to his Excalibur. Balba warned Fried that it was not a good idea to fight them now. The 2 fragment holders, a demon, a dragon wielder, and an unusual human exceeded their numbers, and he advised a retreat. Fried sighed, pointed at everyone, and promised to kill them all. He then produced a grenade-like device, created a blinding flash, and used it to disappear from the scene. When the light cleared, he was gone. Zenobia instructed Irina to pursue their trail, and the 2 departed together. Issei was about to go after them but sensed 2 demonic presences nearby and realized he would have to explain himself. His luck felt like it was running out. Kiba also followed Zenobia and Irina. Issei looked at Saji and found his expression hollow, as if he had been scolded harshly. Saji and Kaneko bore the consequences of an encounter with Sona Shurturai, and Issei watched them being disciplined in silence. It was clear the punishment had been severe. After a few minutes, Irina and Rias approached Issei together and asked why he had infiltrated Kuo Academy. Issei struggled to respond and suggested they move to a more appropriate place to talk. Both agreed, and they headed toward Kuo Academy to speak privately. Issei felt the weight of the conversation ahead, especially with Irina in danger. Later, after a long conversation, Issei stood and told Rias he would step outside for a bit because he wanted to check on a few things. Rias nodded and remained seated, watching him with a relaxed expression. She remarked that if Issei was truly an angel, she would ask him to leave Kuro, but that decision would require consulting Onisama since this was demon territory. Her tone shifted between surprise and her usual confident arrogance, a personality that Issei found both baffling and familiar. Suddenly, a loud explosion sounded. Issei looked out through one of the classroom windows and saw smoke rising in the distance, marking the next disturbance on an already chaotic day. When he turned to tell Rias something, he saw that she looked serious and was speaking with someone. He approached to listen, but their conversation ended before he could learn anything, and Rias looked at him with a fixed expression. Rias informed him that Irina had been defeated and asked him to come with her. The news stunned him. He fell into step behind her with a frown, thinking about who could have hurt Irina and hoping she was still all right. Rias asked Sona what had happened. Sona reassured Issei that Irina was all right. They had just healed her, but she was exhausted. Sona instructed everyone except Saji to escort the exorcist to the infirmary immediately. He watched the servants of Sona carry Irina away, worried despite knowing they intended only to treat her wounds. Seeing her in that state struck something inside him. He felt weak for not being able to protect her and apologized silently to Irina. Anger built as he swore to himself to make whoever had attacked her pay for what they had done and for stealing her fragment of Excalibur. At that moment a familiar voice called out. He turned and recognized the same arrogant priest they had fought before. Everyone went on guard, bracing for an attack. The ex-exorcist announced that he was not there to fight the demons but to deliver a message from his master. Rias and Sona exchanged puzzled looks and Rias asked who his master was. Behind the priest, a purple rift opened and from it stepped a man with pointed ears and the wings of a fallen angel, 14 pairs of them. At the sight of those wings the seriousness of the situation crystallized for him. The fallen angel introduced himself as Kokabeel, a cadre of Grigori, and spoke to Rias with contempt, mocking her resemblance to Lucifer. Rias remained calm and asked what Kokabeel intended. Kokabeel declared his goal. He intended to start another war by attacking the Sisters of the Mao and by eliminating the exorcist who had opposed him, thinking such acts would attract heaven's attention. He said he was tired of the investigations into sacred gears and wanted chaos instead. Hearing the threat against Irina made him furious. A familiar shimmer of light coalesced, and Sakura appeared with a playful, confident expression. Kokabeel looked surprised and curious at her arrival. He told Kokabeel that he would not be allowed to harm Irina and that he would protect her. He unfurled his wings in brilliant light. Sakura smiled broadly and offered her support. Kokabeel's curiosity turned to hatred as he stared at them. He vowed that he would make Kokabeel pay and defeat him, not resorting to cruel or graphic vengeance but determined to stop him and strip him of his power. Sakura stepped forward and told Kokabeel that he had made a grave mistake in provoking her master and that he would suffer the consequences. She urged Issei to demonstrate his power and use her aid to defeat the enemy. Grateful for her help, he accepted and called forth his booster gear, speaking to Draig and receiving the support of his friends. He prepared himself to defend Irina and to face Kokabeel. He called to Draig to begin. Channeling sacred power, he readied an attack meant to press their advantage. Kokabeel shifted his attention to Rias and taunted her, saying she had only a limited time to protect the place and that he would enjoy creating chaos until a Mao or her brother arrived. He also challenged Issei, expressing a desire to fight him and laughing at the prospect. Draig promised an extra incentive if Issei could wipe the smile off Kokabeel's face within 15 minutes. Issei accepted the challenge, steeling himself for the confrontation to come.